A 6-year-old boy watched a Krayt dragon swallow his mother whole, and he didn't cry. This is the story of the wounded heir of 2 sons, the Jedi who became a shadow, the Tusken who became a Sith. He was born in the silence between sandstorms, not in a Jedi temple, not in the arms of the Republic, but deep within the red dunes of Tatooine, where names were whispered and life was survival. His name was A'Sharad Hett. No records marked his birth. No celebration welcomed his arrival. Only the desert knew he existed, and the desert does not speak. His father, A'Sharad Hett, had once been a Jedi Knight, powerful, respected, and feared by the enemies of peace. But the Clone Wars had not begun yet. The galaxy still believed in heroes, and A'Sharad no longer did. He had vanished from the Order many years before, fleeing the politics of Coruscant and the hypocrisy he could no longer ignore. He abandoned the Jedi Code and escaped to the Outer Rim, to a planet that erased everything but the present, Tatooine, a world of slaves and secrets, where the sun doesn't set, and the past doesn't matter. There, in exile, A'Sharad became something else, not a Jedi, not a criminal. He was reborn among the Tusken Raiders, a wandering tribe of warriors who lived by ritual, by vengeance, and by silence. And in time, they accepted him. They called him the Outlander who kills with light. But A'Sharad didn't see any of that. To him, this was just home. A worn camp of tents that moved with the wind. A mother who cooked in silence, wrapping him in heavy cloth to shield his face from the suns. A father who left at dawn with a gadify stick and returned with blood on his robe. The boy was never told why the off-worlders hated them. He was never told what Jedi meant. He only knew that he was different, because the elders looked at him like something fragile, something foreign. And when he touched the bones of dead banthas, he could still hear them scream. No one taught him what the Force was, but it was there, beneath the sand, beneath his skin, like a second heartbeat, buried under silence. He grew up watching death from a distance. He watched Jawas get torn apart by slavers for scraps. He watched Tusken children vanish in the night. He watched the storms roll in from the west, black walls of dust swallowing everything in their path. And he never looked away, because his father never did. At night, A'Sharad would sit by the fire with his son and speak in half-sentences, half-warnings. You must never pity the off-worlders. They pity us, and that makes them weak. A'Sharad didn't understand, but he listened. He memorized the way his father moved, the way his breath slowed before a kill, the way his fingers curled around a lightsaber he no longer admitted to owning. The Tusken people did not sing lullabies. They taught their young how to track moisture farmers by their footprints, how to carve weapons from bone, how to speak without words. And yet, when A'Sharad slept, he dreamed of stars, of planets he had never seen, of voices calling from beyond the dunes, and sometimes of a city of light, filled with warriors dressed in brown and gold. He never told anyone, because he didn't know what it meant, and because in the desert, dreams were dangerous. They made you weak. And weak things died. The first time A'Sharad ignited his father's lightsaber, it hummed like a buried memory. He didn't know why he had done it. There was no one to fight, no one to impress. Only the bones of a dewback and the silence of a camp asleep. But the moment the blade came to life, the air changed. Even the wind seemed to pause. And something ancient stirred in his chest, not pride, not joy, but fear. The same kind his father had in his eyes when he saw him. Because A'Sharad Hett knew what this meant. The boy was not just strong. He was too strong. There had always been whispers in the camp. The way A'Sharad's wounds healed faster than the others. The way sandstorms seemed to shift around him. The way animals went quiet when he walked by. He was born of two worlds, but belonged to neither. A'Sharad had once hoped to raise him Tusken, to let the Jedi part fade like a wound that would never reopen. But the Force does not forget its own. And the boy was changing. He began asking questions about the lightsaber, about the robes his father kept hidden, about the dreams that wouldn't stop. At first, A'Sharad tried to explain. He told him of Coruscant, of a city that swallowed the sky, of the Jedi Temple, where children were taken from their families to serve something greater than themselves. He spoke of peace, of balance, but he didn't speak of the war, of the betrayals, of the politics, of the Jedi who let people suffer in silence because the Council told them to wait. A'Sharad listened, but he didn't understand. To him, the Jedi were ghosts, symbols of a life that had nothing to do with the burning sand beneath his feet. The Tusken tribe was his family, his world, his truth. But the Force kept pushing. One morning, while hunting alone, he was ambushed by slavers, men who didn't care who he was, only what he might be worth. He tried to fight, but he was still just a boy. They beat him, shackled him, mocked the cloth he wore, and called him offspring of filth. They never saw the lightsaber until it was too late. It wasn't the blade that frightened them. It was his eyes, calm, empty, silent. When his father found him, standing over their corpses, A'Sharad didn't flinch. He only said one thing: they were off-worlders. A'Sharad didn't answer, because there was nothing left to say. The desert had done its work. The boy had begun to break, not into something cruel, but into something unsure. Torn between two histories, one he didn't know how to claim, and one that refused to let him go. That night, A'Sharad made a decision. He knew the Jedi would find them eventually. He knew the galaxy would not leave them alone forever. So he began training his son. Not as a Tusken, not as a Jedi, but as something in between. He taught him Form IV, Ataru, the way of agility and speed. He taught him how to blend Tusken stealth with Jedi discipline. How to listen to the wind, but never let it control his thoughts. And slowly, the boy grew stronger. But he also grew quieter. He no longer laughed with the other children, no longer dreamed aloud. He became still like his father. The tribe respected him, but they did not trust him. He spoke their tongue, wore their clothes, followed their customs. But his blood was different. And the Force was louder now, calling, pulling, preparing. He was a child between identities, born of a world that rejected outsiders, and destined for a galaxy that would never see him clearly. A Jedi in the skin of a Tusken shaped by the fears of the Jedi, and in that divide, something darker was beginning to grow. The twin suns were setting when the Jedi came. They arrived in silence, cloaked figures, stepping out of a rusted freighter, robes heavy with dust, faces hidden from the wind. To the Tusken tribe, they looked like ghosts. But to A'Sharad Hett, they were fragments of a past he had tried to bury. Among them was Ki-Adi-Mundi, his old comrade from the wars, sent by the Council to retrieve a lost brother, to bring him home. But A'Sharad no longer believed in that word. He had seen what home meant in the Republic: politics, compromise, war disguised as peace. When the Jedi found him, he refused to return. He told them that the desert had taught him more truth than the temple ever had. And for a time, it seemed the confrontation would end with words. But words die quickly on Tatooine. A group of slavers had followed the Jedi's trail, believing them to be smugglers, carrying spice or weapons. When they attacked, the dunes erupted in fire. Blasters tore through tents, and Tusken cries filled the air. A'Sharad was only a boy, but he fought. He had learned from his father how to move unseen, how to strike between breaths. He wielded his father's saber for the first time in true battle, its green light reflecting in the eyes of dying men. The fight was chaos. The tribe scattered. The Jedi defended themselves, torn between saving lives and protecting one of their own. And in the middle of it all, A'Sharad Hett stood like a monument to defiance, a man who had abandoned peace, now forced to kill to protect it. When the smoke cleared, the ground was soaked red. The slavers lay dead, but so did A'Sharad. Ki-Adi-Mundi found him kneeling in the sand. A blaster wound through his chest, his mask shattered. He was still breathing barely as his son ran to him. A'Sharad didn't understand at first. He thought his father was meditating, waiting for the next storm to pass. But when he touched his face, there was no warmth, only wind. A'Sharad's last words were not about the Force or destiny or the Jedi. He said, "Remember who you are." And then he was gone. The boy screamed until the dunes went quiet again. For the tribe, the death of their adopted leader was the end of an era. They buried him beneath the bones of a bantha and left his saber with his son. But the Jedi would not let the child remain. The council had ordered it. The boy must be taken to Coruscant. A'Sharad fought them. He cursed them in the Tusken tongue. He tried to stay beside the grave, clutching the sand in his hands as if he could hold his father there forever. But Ki-Adi-Mundi knew that if he left the boy, he would die. So he did what Jedi always do. He obeyed. That night, under a blood-red sky, they took him away. The boy did not speak during the journey. He only stared out the viewport at the shrinking planet, its twin suns, fading behind the ship's engines. Everything he had known, the tribe, the desert, his mother's silence, his father's strength was gone. And all that remained was the sound of the hyperdrive. Cold, constant, unforgiving. The Jedi told him that he would be trained, that he would become one of them, that he would learn to let go. But A'Sharad didn't want to let go, because the desert had already taken everything from him, and now the Jedi had taken what was left. In that moment, he made a promise to himself, one no council would ever hear. He would never forget the desert, he would never forget the mask, and he would never forgive the galaxy for what it had done to his father. Because for A'Sharad Hett, the Force was no longer a path to peace. It was the only weapon he had left. The Jedi Temple was not made for children like him. Its walls were polished stone, cold and precise, humming with silent judgment. The corridors were too quiet, the air too clean, and the people, they spoke in calm tones, but looked at him like something broken. A'Sharad walked among them, wrapped in the robes they gave him, but still wearing the desert beneath his skin. He didn't speak much. Not because he couldn't, but because the words they used didn't fit the world he had come from. They asked him to meditate. He listened. They asked him to study. He obeyed. But when he closed his eyes, he didn't see balance. He saw fire. He saw the moment his father fell. He saw the Jedi standing over him, offering peace too late. And he saw himself small, helpless, and forgotten. The masters tried to guide him. Some were gentle, others stern. They debated his training in whispers, unsure what to make of a Tusken child who wielded the Force like a weapon. But Ki-Adi-Mundi defended him. He reminded them that the Force chose its vessels, not the Council, and that sometimes wounds carved deeper paths. A'Sharad advanced quickly. He was strong not just with the lightsaber, but with intuition. He felt things before they happened. He moved with unnatural stillness, like a storm waiting behind still air. But he struggled with one lesson. Detachment. They told him to let go of the past, to let go of grief, to see his father's death as a step toward understanding. But he didn't want understanding. He wanted justice. And the Force, as they described it, felt more like surrender. He kept his father's saber, even when offered another. He refused to cut his hair, and he asked to wear his Tusken wrappings beneath his robes. The masters allowed it, reluctantly, because they saw that even in resistance, the boy was learning, not how to be a Jedi in their image, but how to be something new. In time, he was assigned missions with other Padawans. He spoke little, but fought with discipline. He didn't show fear. He didn't show anger, but inside, it was always there. Whispers from the past, dust in his lungs, a shadow that followed him even beneath Coruscant's light. He didn't hate the Jedi, but he didn't trust them either. Because they hadn't come to Tatooine until it was too late. Because they believed in peace, but built themselves for war. Because they told him that letting go would bring freedom. But every time he tried, it felt like betrayal. And yet, the Force remained with him. It guided his steps, protected his life. Whispered when he stood alone on the temple balconies, staring out at the stars, wondering which one led back to his home. Sometimes he felt his father there, not in voice, not in spirit, but in the silence between his thoughts. Not gone, not forgotten, just waiting. Waiting for him to become strong enough. To decide what kind of man he would be. Not the Jedi's version, not the Tuskens either. Something else. Something shaped by loss and bound by fire. The other younglings feared him, though they didn't say it. He was polite. He was calm. But his eyes carried something older than his age. Something the temple could not erase. And the Force did not ask him to forget. It remembered everything. Even if the Jedi did not. The robes fit, but the face did not. A'Sharad Hett stood among the Jedi, dressed in their brown and beige, his lightsaber clipped in silence at his side. He bowed when told. He obeyed when asked. But the moment he entered the training halls, the room would shift. The others would speak softer, watch longer, smile less. Because beneath the cowl, he still wore the wrappings of his father, Tusken cloth, bound tight across his face. Across his history, the masters didn't stop him. Not at first. Perhaps they thought it was a phase, a child's way of grieving, clinging to his lost tribe. Or maybe they didn't want to admit what he reminded them of. That the Force belonged to more than temples and stars. That sometimes it rose from fire and dirt. He trained hard, harder than most. His style was efficient, precise, the result of years surviving where weakness meant death. He sparred with Form 4, but his movements were not elegant like the others. They were sharp, controlled, filled with weight. The other Padawans whispered about him. They called him the Sand Child, the Masked One. They said he didn't blink, that he didn't speak, that he had killed slavers before he was even chosen. He heard it all. He remembered every word, but he never replied. Because silence was the first weapon the desert had taught him. Only one other Padawan dared stand close. A young girl named Bultar Swan. She didn't ask about the wrappings, didn't flinch when he walked near. She trained as if she didn't see the difference. He respected that. But even then, he didn't let her in. Because A'Sharad knew what happened when you allowed yourself to care. He had held his father's body in the sand. He had watched his tribe fade into the dunes. And the Jedi, they offered no warmth, only purpose. so he became what they needed him to be. Disciplined, obedient, quiet. But inside, he carried the bones of two worlds, the Jedi's code, the Tusken's wrath. And both pulled at him in different ways. When asked to study galactic politics, he listened but never believed. When told to let go of anger, he nodded but never forgot. And when shown the old Jedi texts, he read them but only to find their limits, because he didn't want to be like the Masters. He didn't want to explain peace while holding a weapon. He wanted to understand why the galaxy kept breaking people like his father, why justice arrived only after death, why the Jedi refused to look beyond their holes until it was too late. He meditated. But his thoughts always wandered back to the desert, to the smell of scorched leather, to the quiet of bantha herds at dusk, to the feeling of holding a weapon and meaning it. One night, after training, Ki-Adi-Mundi visited him in the archives. The Syrian master sat beside him in silence, watching the stars through a long glass window. Then he said, "You don't need to wear the mask forever." A'Sharad didn't look at him. He only answered, "Then why do you still wear yours?" The master didn't respond, because he understood. The boy wasn't just mourning, he was remembering, and memory, for a Tusken, is sacred. So they sat in silence until the stars shifted. Neither of them moved. Because some masks are not made of cloth. Some are born from fire and grief, and the promise that you will never forget who you were, even when everyone else already has. The war began with thunder. Not the kind that rolls in from the sky, but the kind that explodes from hyperspace. Starships bleeding out of light. Orders spoken too fast. A line drawn too wide. The Clone Wars did not ask for heroes. It asked for soldiers. And A'Sharad Hett answered. He was no longer a Padawan. He had earned his place as a Jedi Knight, but he still wore the mask. Not out of tradition. Not even for the desert anymore. But because war changes things, it asks questions the Jedi never prepare you for. How many should you save? How many are too far gone? How much of yourself can you lose before you stop being what you were? The battlefield didn't care that he came from sand. It didn't care about peace treaties or temple rituals. It only cared if you survived. So he led. Clones followed him without hesitation. Because he never sent others where he wouldn't go first. Because he moved like a ghost through fire. And because he never hesitated. But the Jedi Council noticed something else. His reports lacked reflection. His victories felt too exact, too quiet. They asked him if he was meditating. He said yes. They asked if the violence disturbed him. He said no. The truth was simpler. Violence didn't disturb him because it never had. The desert had already shown him what life looked like without rules. And now, so had the galaxy. On Jabiim, he watched a Republic post drown in its own trenches. On Salukami, he walked through villages burned by friendly fire. And on Boz Pity, he faced Sith war droids older than any council record. Each time, he survived. Each time, he returned. But each time, he was quieter, because the Jedi told him the Force was a river. But in war, it felt more like a knife. He began wearing full Tusken armor beneath his robes, not to honor the past, but to protect what little he had left. Because the more he fought, the more he saw the truth. The Jedi weren't guardians anymore. They were generals. And generals don't ask questions. They give orders. Even when those orders kill children. He once tried to spare a group of prisoners on Argai Minor, separatist conscripts who had surrendered. The clones refused. They said they had orders from a different commander. When A'Sharad reported it, The Jedi thanked him, then promoted the clone. After that, he stopped writing reports. He began keeping a private record, encrypted, buried in his transport systems. Not for the Council, not for history, but for himself. A place to speak what he couldn't say aloud. A place to remember who he was, before the war turned silence into obedience. And still, he fought. Because the alternative was worse. Because every time he thought about walking away, he saw his father, kneeling in the sand, bleeding under twin suns, dying for a galaxy that never looked back. So A'Sharad stayed, not because he believed in the Republic, but because he still believed in the Force. Somewhere, buried beneath the armor, beneath the mask, beneath the orders that never stopped coming, he fought like someone who couldn't afford to lose, because he knew what happened when no one fought at all. And if the Jedi couldn't see what they were becoming, then maybe someone had to remain awake, even if it meant standing alone, even if it meant becoming something the Jedi were too afraid to name. The war dragged on longer than anyone expected. Planets changed hands so often that even the maps became meaningless. One week, a system was free. The next, it belonged to someone else. The flags changed, but the bodies never stopped falling. A'Sharad Hett led campaigns across worlds no one would remember. Dust, ice, jungle. Each one smelled like death. Each one ended the same way: silence after fire. He learned to read the eyes of clones. He could tell who would die before the next rotation, who was too tired to keep fighting, who still believed in the cause, and who had started to question it. Sometimes they asked him questions, not about tactics, about the point of it all. He had no answers, because he had started to wonder the same thing. The Jedi kept saying the Force was guiding them, that the Republic still stood for peace, but the Senate grew darker, its words colder, its orders less human. And the clones, they followed commands that didn't sound like orders anymore. They sounded like instinct. On Ryloth, A'Sharad watched a Jedi Knight execute civilians for sheltering separatists. On Cato Neimoidia, he watched clones torch a field hospital. Each time, the Council said the same thing. The dark side clouds everything, but Hett didn't need the Force to see what was happening. The Jedi were losing themselves one battle at a time. He still fought beside them, still obeyed orders, still led men into fire. But the lines were blurring. The Tusken inside him, the survivor, began whispering that peace was a myth, that strength was the only truth the galaxy respected, and that mercy was just another way to die. He tried to silence it, but every mission made that harder. When he closed his eyes, he no longer saw his father's death. He saw clones without faces, children without homes, and Jedi who killed without hesitation. He didn't hate them, he pitied them, because he understood what they couldn't admit. You can't fight a war for peace. The day it became clear was on Bar's Pity, a campaign no one speaks about now. They were ambushed Republic forces trapped between two separatist divisions. The battle lasted 3 days. When it ended, half his men were gone. The survivors begged to leave the wounded behind. There were too many. The enemy was closing in. It was the only logical choice, but Hett couldn't do it. He ordered every man carried out, even those barely alive. The clones didn't argue, but he saw it in their eyes. Doubt, not in him. In themselves, they weren't supposed to care, not supposed to think. They were bred for obedience. And yet, as they carried their brothers through the mud, something changed. They saw him a Jedi refusing to act like the others. And for the first time, they saw what leadership was supposed to look like. That night, as fires burned low, one of them asked him quietly, "Sir, what happens when the war ends?" A'Sharad didn't answer, because he knew the truth. The war wouldn't end, not really. Not for him. Not for any of them. The Jedi were too deep now, the Republic too blind, and the Force, once his guide, had gone silent. So he sat in the dark, sharpening his blade, not out of habit, out of ritual, because if peace ever came, he wasn't sure he'd recognize it anymore. And when dawn arrived, he rose again. No prayer, no speech, just another order, another planet, another piece of his soul buried beneath a mask that no longer felt heavy. When the message came, everything stopped. Not the battle, not the war. Those things kept going. But inside him, something froze. The clones turned first. Their helmets shifted, their postures stiffened, and then they opened fire, not on droids, not on separatists, on Jedi. Order 66. He didn't know what it meant, didn't need to, because the moment his second in command aimed at his back, he moved. 2 blaster bolts missed, the third didn't. It scorched across his shoulder, burned through armor and skin. He dropped low, deflected the fourth with his saber, and vanished into smoke. He didn't kill them, not then, because part of him still believed it was a mistake, a malfunction, a test of loyalty. But when he reached the command center, he saw it confirmed. Across the galaxy, every Jedi, marked for death. He escaped Boz Pity through a maintenance hangar, blood trailing behind him, robes scorched black. By the time he reached the outer rim, the Republic was gone. The Jedi Temple had fallen. Coruscant was under martial law, and a new voice ruled the stars. The Emperor. He didn't know his name yet, only the title, only the sound of it heavy, final, like a door closing on history. A'Sharad went dark. He erased his signal, shut down his ship's beacon, and hid in systems without names. Not because he feared death, because he didn't know what was left to die for. He had fought the war. He had bled for the Order. He had followed the code. And in the end, none of it mattered. The Jedi were ashes, and the galaxy had moved on. He returned to Tatooine, not to rebuild, not to find peace, but because it was the only place that had ever told him the truth, that the strong survive, that the galaxy forgets, that masks are easier to wear than faces. But the desert had changed too. The Tusken tribes no longer remembered his name. The old camp was gone. His father's grave, lost to sand. There was nothing left to protect, so he wandered, sometimes cloaked, sometimes armored, always silent. He watched off-worlders grow in number. Moisture farms spreading like infection, suns burning hotter than memory. And he realized something. He was no longer Tusken. Not really, and not Jedi either. Not anymore. He was something else. A shadow of both. A man with too many memories and nowhere to bury them. One night, as he walked the ridge near Mars Pelgo, he saw a slaver caravan. 6 men, 3 cages, 2 children inside. He didn't hesitate. He cut them down with precision. No cruelty, no mercy. When it was done, he opened the cages. The children ran, didn't ask who he was, didn't say thank you. He stood there a long time, covered in dust, blood drying on his gloves, and for the first time in years, he spoke aloud. Not to the Force, not to the stars, just to himself. They'll never know who I was. And maybe that was the point. He began wearing the mask again, not out of grief, not for heritage, but because the galaxy had no face worth showing his own to. He became a myth, a warrior seen only in glimpses, the one who helped, but never stayed. Whispers called him the last Tusken Jedi, but he no longer believed in either, because the Jedi were gone. And the Tuskens had forgotten him. All he had left was the silence, and in that silence, something darker was beginning to breathe. The first planet he hid on had no name. A desert moon orbiting a dead star. Nothing grew there. Nothing hunted. A place where even the Force felt thinner, like breath in a dying lung. But A'Sharad Hett didn't need life. He only needed silence. His shuttle barely held together. The hyperdrive had failed 3 jumps earlier, but he landed in the dust and walked out into the wind, wrapped in cloth, blood still dried along his arm. The clones had followed him as far as they could. They weren't just soldiers now. They were hunters, precise, ruthless, different. He saw it in their eyes during the last ambush, a clarity that didn't belong to them. They didn't question, didn't speak. They only obeyed, and still, they hesitated before killing him. Not all, not most, but some. He knew their names: CT-44, 7, Rexon, Jail. Men he had trained beside, laughed beside. Men who had asked him what peace might look like when it was all over. Now they asked nothing. Now they pulled triggers. He escaped only because one of them missed. Only because the Force still whispered where the blasters would land before they fired. He didn't try to reason with them anymore. Didn't look for hesitation, because that was the mistake the Jedi kept making. Thinking loyalty could outlast programming. Thinking friendship was stronger than obedience. Thinking the Republic was still something worth protecting. He learned quickly. The old codes were no longer safe. Jedi emergency frequencies were monitored. Temple fallback locations compromised. The Empire, still in its infancy, already knew where to look. And the moment he reached out through the Force, he felt them reach back. Not Jedi, not survivors, Inquisitors. He didn't know the name yet, didn't know their origin, but he knew their feeling. Predators, dark mirrors of what the Jedi used to be. They didn't come often, but when they did, they didn't miss. So, he stopped reaching out. He moved from world to world, sometimes stealing, sometimes trading, always hiding. He changed his ship, changed his codes, but never his mask. Because even as he shed his name, his rank, his lightsaber, he held on to the face the galaxy had taught him to wear. Tusken. It was the only truth he had left. But even that began to crack. He was not welcome on tribal worlds. The Tuskens saw him as something other, too polished, too quiet, too clean. They didn't see the mask. They saw the shadow behind it. The Republic had betrayed him. The Jedi had abandoned him. And now, even the desert turned away. He killed his first bounty hunter on Ord Radama. She'd tracked him across 4 systems, a Zabrak with Imperial credits and a voice like broken glass. When she cornered him in a mining outpost, she laughed and said, "You're not worth what they're paying." She died 2 breaths later. He didn't bury her, didn't leave a message. Only her ship remained, and the trail it left behind. Because by then, the Empire wasn't looking for A'Sharad Hett. They were looking for what he might become. And in the silence of forgotten stars, hunted by the soldiers he once led, he began to wonder if they were right. Because every day, something inside him faded. Not his strength, not his clarity, but the part of him that still wanted to be found. He returned to the temple in secret, not in person, not in body, but through a stolen signal, a forgotten back channel buried beneath the main holonet. Encrypted, obsolete, left behind like everything else the Jedi once were. He accessed it from a junker station above Megiddo. No Republic colors, no flags, just rust and static. He tried every frequency the Order had taught him. Emergency recall, survivor protocols, temple beacons on Tatooine, Ossus, even Tython. Each one silent, not jammed, not corrupted. Empty. The Jedi weren't hiding. They were gone. He stared at the console for hours, waiting for a voice, a sign, anything. But there was only static. The Jedi Code had once called for serenity, but in that moment, all he felt was weight. The kind that doesn't break you all at once. It just keeps pressing until your breath grows shorter, until even remembering becomes too loud. He wandered again, not with purpose, just motion. He visited ruins on Jeddah, found the temples collapsed, the pilgrims scattered, the archives burned. In the ashes, he found pieces of old robes scorched, stiff, still folded. Like someone had tried to protect them, until the fire won. He traveled to the caves of Ilum. The Kyber crystals were silent, the caverns cold and hollow. No voice of the Force, no vision. Only walls that echoed with nothing. He thought maybe he'd find himself there. Instead, he left without a sound. Other Jedi tried to hide. He heard rumors, whispers. A Zabrak knight on Malastare, caught and executed. A Mirialan master poisoned on Nar Shaddaa. A half-trained Padawan, turned over by his own family. The Empire didn't just want the Jedi dead. It wanted them erased. No names, no graves, no memory. A'Sharad felt it with every world he crossed. The way the galaxy stopped looking for light. The way even children whispered that Jedi were traitors. And worst of all, the way it almost made sense. Because when he looked back, really looked, the Order had already been bleeding for years. So much compromise, so much fear, so much loyalty to a republic that forgot what justice was. They thought they could fight darkness without touching it. They were wrong, and now their temples were dust. He visited the site of an old outpost on Renvar, a listening station once used during the Outer Rim sieges. He walked its ice-covered halls alone, found Jedi names carved into the wall. Dozens, maybe more. Most were dead now. Some he had fought beside. He didn't speak, didn't cry. He just stood there, one hand on the stone. And then, he carved one more name. A'Sharad Hett. Not as a Jedi, not as a Tusken, just a father. And when he finished, he left his last clean robe folded beneath it. The cold didn't bother him, because he no longer needed warmth. The Force still lingered in him, but it didn't speak like it once did. It watched, distant, unmoving, as if waiting to see what he would become. And so, for the first time in his life, A'Sharad stopped calling himself Jedi. Not out of shame, not out of anger, because there was nothing left to serve. And when you bury something that deep, you stop digging, you start listening, and something began to whisper back. He stopped using the name Hett, not because it was hunted, but because it belonged to someone else now. Someone who still believed the galaxy could be saved. That man was gone. What remained walked in silence through starports where law was a suggestion, where bounties were currency, and every face wore a lie. He drifted into the Outer Rim not as a Jedi, not even as a Tusken, just another cloaked stranger with a weapon he never showed. Places like Nar Shaddaa, Socorro, and Rune didn't ask questions. If you had credits, you were welcome. If you didn't, you disappeared. And he never stayed long. He took odd work, silent guard duty, ship protection through pirate lanes, tracking down stolen cargo for criminals who didn't know who he really was. Or maybe they did. Maybe they just didn't care. Because in the Rim, your past didn't matter. Only what you could survive. And he survived. When others bartered with threats, he stood still. When blasters were drawn, he didn't flinch. People began to notice. They called him Ghost, Desert Shade, the one with no sleep. He never corrected them, because sometimes myths are safer than names. He slept rarely. When he did, the dreams came back. The smell of scorched tents, the flash of clone fire, the way the Force used to feel warm, full, alive. Now it was a distant hum, still there, but different, like it was waiting for something. He didn't question it anymore. Because questions were for the man he used to be. And this man had nothing left to ask. His lightsaber stayed hidden, wrapped in cloth, stored beneath floorboards. He used it only when death was certain. And each time he did, something in him grew quieter. The blade still hummed the same, but it no longer felt like his. One job took him to Svivran, where a group of ex-separatist officers had turned war machines into smugglers. They offered him a fortune to kill a traitor hiding among their ranks. He didn't ask who it was. He didn't ask why. He accepted. But when he found the target, it was a former Jedi, wounded, older, hiding under a new name, raising a child. She recognized him, called him by the name he hadn't heard in months. He didn't answer, didn't raise his weapon, but the silence told her enough. She nodded, and he walked away. That night, he waited outside her camp, thinking maybe she'd run, maybe she'd vanish like he had. But in the morning, her camp was cold, her ship gone. He never saw her again. And the smugglers never found her either. He told them the job was done. They paid him in silence, and he moved on, not because he cared, but because mercy was the last part of him that still felt real. He didn't know how long he stayed out there, months, maybe years, time blurred. Because when there's nothing to count, you stop counting. You just keep moving, but each step felt heavier. Not from guilt, not from failure, from something else. Something he didn't have a name for yet. A presence, a pull, not light, not dark, just hunger. It didn't speak, didn't show itself, but it followed him into every shadow, every silence, every place the Force once felt clean. And somewhere, he began to follow it back. It began on Korriban, not by plan, not by design, just the slow drift of a man running out of places to hide. His ship, damaged and starved for fuel, limped through forgotten space until gravity pulled it down to a world of red dust and ruins. He didn't know its name at first, but the air told him soon enough. The Force was thick here, heavy, like it remembered every scream ever buried beneath its sand. He walked through the remains of tombs older than the Republic itself. Broken temples, shattered idols, bones wrapped in shadow. It felt alive, not kind, not welcoming, alive. And for the first time in years, the Force spoke again. Not in words, in feeling. A low vibration beneath his ribs, a pulse behind his thoughts. Something was watching him, something ancient, patient. He should have left, he knew that. But curiosity had always been a weakness of the Jedi, and maybe still his. He entered a cavern carved with markings he couldn't read. Symbols burned into stone by hands that no longer existed, and deeper inside light, not the kind he knew. Sickly, red, flickering like fire trapped in glass. It led him to a sarcophagus. A name etched across the lid, Zoxan. He didn't know who she was, but her presence filled the air like poison. Old, tired, hungry. He placed his hand against the stone, and the whispers began. They didn't sound like speech, more like memory. They showed him the Jedi's fall, the weakness of light, the endless cycles of betrayal and obedience. And in the center of it all, the same truth he'd always known. Peace was a lie. He tried to pull away, but the force inside the tomb clung to him, like vines through bone, like old blood remembering a body. It showed him visions, empires rising and falling, warriors crowned and broken, Jedi turning into ghosts, then myths, then nothing, and it whispered a promise. Power without chains, order without mercy, purpose beyond the Jedi and beyond the man. He didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. He sat beside the tomb for days, maybe weeks. Time lost meaning again. He felt his wounds close, felt strength return, felt the Force move differently, not as a teacher, not as a guide, but as a storm. He could see it now, the path, not of redemption, but of control. The Jedi had tried to protect balance. The Sith had tried to rule through fear. Both had failed, because both were divided. And maybe, he thought, that was the true disease of the Force, division. So he decided to do what neither side could. He would survive them both. He would wait, grow stronger, until the galaxy forgot his name completely, until it was ready for something new, something that could end the cycle. He left. Korriban changed, not yet dark, not yet Sith, but hollow in a way he could never return from. When he looked at his reflection in the ship's viewport, he saw no man, only the shadow of one. The mask no longer hid him, it defined him. And in that stillness, he accepted the truth that had been chasing him since the desert. A'Sharad Hett was gone. Whatever remained was learning how to breathe without him. There are planets that remember pain. Korriban does not remember. It never forgot. He arrived at night, though the sky above the Valley of the Dark Lords was always red, always still, as if the stars had turned away in silence. His ship sank low between ridges of sandstone and ruin, its landing gear trembling against the wind. Even inside the cockpit, he felt it. Not heat, not fear, a weight. The kind that presses against the soul before it touches the body. He stepped out alone. No droids, no comms, no plan. The sand here didn't shift, it whispered. He could feel it in the bones of his boots, like voices buried just beneath the surface, angry, waiting, cold. He didn't speak, he just walked. Past the remnants of old banners, past jagged spires carved with faces of agony, past statues that had long since lost their names, but not their gaze. The Sith were not buried here. They were entombed, not to rest, but to be remembered. Each tomb was a scar deep and rotting, marked not by grief but by hunger, and among them stood one whose door had not closed. Shoshan. He didn't know her name then, but the Force did. It pulled him toward the entrance, slow and silent, and when he crossed the threshold, the wind stopped. The tomb smelled like iron and rot. Its walls were covered in murals, not art, but warnings. A Jedi flayed alive by lightning, a Sith kneeling in chains, eyes carved open, and above them all, a face, tall, thin, cruel without expression. She was the first of them, one of the ancient dark Jedi who had been exiled for turning on the Republic. Her ship had crashed here, on Korriban, long before the Sith were ever called Sith. She did not teach to enlighten. She taught to dominate, and her spirit had never left. He reached the center chamber. A sarcophagus loomed before him, obsidian, fractured, covered in symbols no translator could decode. But the Force did not need language. The moment he stepped close, the air shifted, and she woke, not in form, not in flesh, but in presence. He felt her mind like a claw against his thoughts, cold, sharp. Curious, she didn't ask his name. She already knew it was a lie. She didn't ask his past. She could taste it in his silence. Instead, she asked one thing: why do you still kneel to death? He didn't answer, didn't understand, but the tomb did. It showed him flashes not of who he was, but of who he could become. Not a Jedi, not a Tusken, not a fugitive, but something else. A will, a storm, a hand that could crush the cycle. He fell to his knees without knowing why, and when he looked up, the tomb was glowing, red, pale, alive. Visions flooded his mind. He saw the Jedi Order shattered, limping, blind. He saw the Sith fragmented, obsessive, clinging to rules that kept them small. And he saw a new path, not of balance, not of freedom, of unity, one will, one code, one Sith. She didn't demand his obedience. She offered him his future. But there was a price. He would have to leave A'Sharad Hett behind, not as a name, as a soul. Everything soft, everything warm, everything afraid. Buried, he placed his hand on the sarcophagus, and the stone didn't move. It breathed. The Force around him howled. Not in warning, in hunger. The tomb was not just watching him, it was choosing him. He did not remember falling asleep, only waking somewhere deeper, somewhere darker. The tomb had changed. Or maybe he had. The air felt thicker now, alive with movement though nothing stirred. The walls pulsed faintly, veins of red light crawling like embers beneath the stone. Each beat matched his heart. Each pulse stronger than the last. He tried to stand but couldn't. His body was heavy, his limbs stiff. He looked down. His hands were no longer his own. The skin was marked, faintly cracked, blackened with ash. When he tried to draw breath, it burned. And then he heard her again. Not from the walls this time, from inside him. Xoxan's voice was colder now, no longer whispering through the Force, speaking through it. You asked for strength, she said. You asked to stop the endless war. He wanted to deny it, but he couldn't, because he had. She showed him visions again. The galaxy endless, bleeding, fractured. The Jedi still clinging to ideals that had already killed them. The Sith hiding, scheming, devouring themselves in secrecy. You were born of both, she said, and that is why both must end. He felt her power surge through his veins. Not light, not darkness, something colder, older. She taught him how to draw from pain, how to bend suffering until it became armor, how to control fear, not resist it. Fear is a tool, she said. It keeps the weak in chains, but if you own it, it becomes your voice. Every lesson carved itself into him not through words, but through agony. She tore through his mind, his memories, his name, until only fragments remained. A boy with sand in his lungs, a soldier hiding behind orders, a man betrayed by both peace and war. Each image burned away, leaving only purpose. She commanded him to rise. He did. And when he stood, the tomb responded. Stone cracked, dust lifted. The chamber glowed as ancient machinery began to stir. Armor black, jagged, crimson-lined, emerged from the floor like bone rising from a grave. It moved toward him, piece by piece, not metal, not forged, grown. It attached itself to his flesh, merging with it. He screamed once, but the sound was short, because the pain became too vast to measure. The armor crawled across his chest, his arms, his throat embedding, fusing, sealing. Every nerve burned, every vein hardened. When it reached his face, he hesitated. He wanted to stop, but the tomb didn't let him. It sealed over his jaw, his mouth, his eyes, and for a moment he was nothing. Only breath, only sound, only a single thought. No more masters. When the process ended, the tomb fell silent again. The glow faded, the air cooled. And standing in the darkness was someone new. The man was gone, the mask remained. He reached for his saber, ignited it. The blade that once hummed green now burned crimson. He stared into its light, steady, harsh, absolute. There was no warmth in it, only truth. Zoxan's voice echoed one last time. You are what the galaxy feared it would create. He didn't reply, didn't thank her, didn't kneel, because she had not given him power. She had only revealed it. And in that silence, something unspoken passed between them. A recognition. She had been the first of her kind. He would be the last. He turned away, walking toward the light at the tomb's mouth. Each step heavier, each breath slower, as if the armor itself was learning to breathe through him. When he emerged into the open air, the sky of Korriban burned red. He didn't feel the heat, didn't feel the wind, only the stillness. The galaxy would know him one day, not as A'Sharad Hett, not as a Jedi, not as a warrior, but as the end of both legacies. He had no need for ceremony, no need for words. Still, the tomb whispered his new name before he could think it, Darth Krayt. And this time, he didn't flinch. He accepted it, because in that name, he found peace. And peace was the one thing he no longer trusted. Power never arrives alone. It always brings hunger, and hunger always brings decay. In the beginning, Darth Krayt believed the pain was part of the transformation. Soshan had told him as much, that true rebirth demanded the death of what came before, and for a while, he believed it. He carried the ache like a trophy, but then it grew. At first, a tremor behind the ribs, then a pulse that climbed the spine. Until one night, the armor he wore began to move. He woke in darkness to find it breathing. Thin coral filaments, slick and alive, stretched across his chest. They were not metal, they were growing. He cut them away with his saber, but by dawn they had returned deeper, thicker, feeding through his veins. He felt them drinking from him, feeding on his life. And the truth came slowly. The armor wasn't Sith, it was Yuuzhan Vong. Organic grafts, living parasites, remnants from the war that had scarred the galaxy decades before. He'd found their technology once, long ago, and thought he could master it. Now it was mastering him. Every movement was agony. Each breath came with resistance, as if the air itself were rebelling. He tried to purge it through meditation, to burn the infection out with the Force. But the dark side only deepened it. Because the corruption wasn't foreign to it. It was it. He searched the stars for healers, scientists, any trace of knowledge that could undo what he had become. On Ryloth, he hunted a surgeon who once served the Vong. On Felucia, he found priests who claimed to know how to calm living armor. None survived their meetings, not because he wanted their deaths, because he couldn't stop himself. The more pain the infection caused, the more the Force answered. The more the Force answered, the more pain it demanded. It was a loop, perfect, merciless. And through it all, Zoxan's voice lingered in his mind, sometimes faint, sometimes clear, like wind through hollow stone. You asked for strength, she reminded him. And you have it, but power is not what you think it is. He wanted to hate her, But she was right. He was stronger now than he had ever been. He could crush ships with thought, bend minds, shatter bones, but he could not stop dying. Each day, the coral armor grew tighter, closing around his chest like a cage. He no longer felt heat or cold, only pressure, only hunger. And it was not just his body that began to fade. His memories did too. He tried to recall the faces of his tribe, his father, the dunes at dawn. But when he closed his eyes, all he saw was red sand and bones that weren't his. He started keeping recordings, fragments of what remained. His voice was calm, stripped of emotion. The words clinical, almost detached. The infection spreads. The pain is constant. The force remains indifferent. I am learning to be indifferent too. He listened back sometimes, not to remember, but to hear if the voice still sounded human. It didn't. He hid again deep in the unknown regions, far from the Empire, far from the rebellion that would one day challenge it. The galaxy kept spinning without him, and he watched it decay, different names. Same corruption, different wars, same blindness. He realized then what the armor had been trying to teach him, that everything living is a parasite of something greater. That peace was only the space between feedings. He began to study what he once despised, the structure of control, how empires rose, how faith collapsed, how order could exist without compassion. He learned, he adapted, and in the quiet between screams, he began to dream again, not of freedom, of dominion. If the armor wished to consume him, it would have to share him first. He would build something from this decay, something that outlived the body, something that made the suffering useful. When the pain returned, he no longer fought it, he welcomed it. Because pain no longer meant dying, it meant creation. He looked at his reflection in the viewport, pale eyes burning through black coral. He didn't see a victim, he saw a beginning. The stars moved without him. Years passed, then decades, and still Darth Krayt did not sleep. His body weakened, his mind deepened, but his purpose, it only sharpened. He no longer searched for peace. Peace was a word used by the dying. He no longer searched for redemption. Redemption belonged to those who regretted. What he searched for now was order. Not balance, not freedom. Order. The kind no Jedi could ever create. The kind the Sith had only ever mimicked. The kind the galaxy had never been worthy of. He studied the past not to worship it, but to dissect it. He looked at Bane, Revan, Malak, Sidious, men who reached for empire and found only chaos. Each of them had tried to impose control, but each had also feared losing it. That fear had been their mistake. He would not make it. He watched the rise of the Empire, then the rebellion, then another empire. New faces, old lies. He watched Jedi return broken, scattered, unsure of their own code. He watched Sith masquerade behind titles and thrones, still clinging to the rule of two like it was holy. But Krayt had seen what the rule of two truly was. A leash, a cycle, an excuse to remain small. The Sith didn't need secrecy anymore. They didn't need to hide in shadows. They were the shadow. He began to prepare, quietly, slowly. From the unknown regions, he reached across forgotten space, calling, gathering, teaching. He found warriors disillusioned by the Jedi, apprentices abandoned by their masters, children born in war, raised in hunger, grown in silence. To them, he offered something the galaxy had denied, purpose. He called them the One Sith. Not an order, not a cult, a principle, one vision, one command, one rule. Him, The galaxy would not be ruled by thousands of opinions. It would be guided by one will, his. And they followed him, not because of legend, not because of prophecy, but because he did not lie. He promised pain. He delivered strength. He trained them in the shadows of dead worlds. Sith purebloods, former Jedi, aliens once scorned by the Empire, each of them forged not in anger, but in purpose. He taught them not to kill for rage, but for order. Not to hate the Jedi, but to replace them. He was not raising servants, he was building successors. And they called him Master. But even in control, he remained alone. The coral armor continued to spread. The Vong infection twisted through his nerves, tighter each year. Some days he could barely move. Others, he saw visions that weren't his. He began experimenting, cloning, alchemy, forces the Jedi had long forbidden. But the Sith had always understood. Death was just another doorway. If the body would not serve him, he would remake it. And if the Force rejected him, he would bend it. He returned to Korriban once more, not to kneel, but to build. There, among the oldest tombs, he carved a new citadel into the rock. Not a shrine, a forge. This was not the Valley of Remembrance. It was the root of what would come. A place to grow darkness, not in secret, but in preparation. His One Sith spread slowly, invisibly. Seeds beneath the skin of the galaxy. He let the Republic rebuild. Let the Jedi teach again. Let peace give people just enough hope to be blind. Because when he returned, he wouldn't need to destroy everything, only what mattered. And still, he did not sleep. He couldn't, because sleep belonged to those who had peace. He had none. Only a vision of crimson banners, of Jedi temples burning under black skies, of his name, spoken not with fear, but with reverence. Darth Krayt, the one who would not die, the one who had no master, the one who learned to use pain like language. He stared out from his fortress as storms rolled across the red horizon, not waiting, not hoping, planning, because the galaxy was already his. It just didn't know it yet. He once believed the armor made him immortal. He was wrong. It began as a vibration under the skin, a low, rhythmic pulse that came and went like distant thunder. At first, he ignored it. Pain was familiar, an old companion. But this was different. This had intention. The coral grafts the Yuuzhan Vong had implanted long ago were waking. They had lain dormant for years, sleeping inside his flesh, feeding quietly. Now they were hungry. When he looked down, he saw small ridges pushing through his chest, faintly glowing beneath the skin. He touched them. They moved. He did not flinch. He had forgotten how. Each day, the growth spread. Threads of living coral crept along his ribs and up his spine, weaving through muscle and bone. They drank his blood, absorbed his nerves, reshaped what they found. They were not disease. They were design. The Yuuzhan Vong had built their technology from life itself, tools that breathed, ships that felt, armor that fed. He had taken their science once to save himself from death. Now it sought to claim him. He tried to sever the infection with the Force, to burn it out of his body cell by cell. The attempt nearly killed him. The parasites fed on the power, adapting faster than he could destroy them. They learned his rhythm, his breathing, his rage, and they began to whisper back. The voice was not Sozhan's. It was older, colder, mechanical, and organic at once. It spoke in feelings more than words, possession, hunger, union. He understood. They wanted a host, not a corpse. They wanted to live through him. At times, he thought of removing the armor entirely. but it had long since become part of him, anchored deep beneath the skin, bonded to the bone. When he pulled at it, blood followed. When he struck it with his saber, it screamed, so he left it. He learned to breathe around the pain. Each inhale scraped against coral ridges beneath his lungs. Each exhale carried the taste of metal and ash. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. He stopped counting the days. Meditation offered no peace. The force trembled inside him, drawn to the chaos within his body. He tried to quiet it. It refused. Soon he could feel the coral in his skull, pulsing behind the eyes. Sometimes it showed him visions, the burning of Coruscant, the fall of Jedi strongholds, the endless pattern of empires devouring themselves. He saw the galaxy as a wound that would never close. And in those visions, he saw himself at its center, not dying, enduring. He began to understand the purpose hidden within the suffering. Pain was not punishment, pain was instruction. It taught focus, endurance, patience. It stripped away illusion until only truth remained. When the spasms came, he knelt through them, forcing his breathing into rhythm with the armor's pulse. When the fever rose, he let it burn until thought blurred into instinct. The coral grew faster. His will grew harder. He told himself it was worth it, that the galaxy needed something pure, something that could no longer feel weakness. Every Jedi he had known had broken under mercy. Every Sith had fallen to greed. But this was beyond both. He began cataloging the mutations, recording every symptom, every pattern of pain, not as complaint, as study. The body was dying, but the lesson was eternal. He saw parallels in everything: the parasite within the flesh, the corruption within the force, the hypocrisy within order. All of it consuming itself. All of it waiting for someone strong enough to harness decay and make it serve. One night, as he stood before the mirror of black glass aboard his ship, the reflection moved before he did. The coral beneath his skin writhed, forming patterns like veins of fire, and for a moment, he could not tell which part of him was human. He whispered to the thing beneath his skin, not in fear but in recognition. If you wish to live, then learn to live. Obey. The voice inside him pulsed once, like acknowledgement. He smiled, or perhaps the armor did. The transformation had begun, not the end of his life, the beginning of his dominion. He thought the armor would stop growing. It didn't. The coral burrowed deeper with each breath, spreading across muscle, wrapping itself around organs that once belonged only to him. At first, it was only discomfort, a constant ache in the ribs, a shiver down the spine. Then it became something else, a struggle for ownership. Every movement brought resistance. Every heartbeat came with weight. It was no longer armor, it was confinement. He stood before the meditation altar on Korriban, his reflection dark and motionless. The figure in the glass no longer looked like a man. Flesh and coral blended until neither could be separated. Black ridges traced his neck like roots through soil. Breathing sounded like wind through metal. He tested his limbs, forcing them to obey through sheer command of will. The muscles trembled, not from weakness, but rebellion. The parasite fought back. It didn't want balance. It wanted dominance. He felt its rhythm shift to his pulse, syncing perfectly, adapting. It knew him now. It learned faster than he healed. When he slept, it watched. When he woke, it waited. And when he reached for the force, it drank from it, feeding greedily, savoring every surge of power that flowed through his veins. It was alive, and worse, it was aware. He sought to cage it, to bind it as he would an apprentice. He meditated in stillness for hours, sometimes days, pushing every thought inward. He shaped barriers within the force, walls of shadow around his mind, but the corals slipped through them like smoke. Because this was not a creature of the Force, it was older, raw, unbound by light or dark. The pain became constant, a living hum just beneath perception. When it subsided, he almost missed it, because silence felt unnatural now. He began speaking to it in whispers, testing its response. Sometimes it pulsed, slow and steady, as though listening. Other times it writhed in irritation, curling around his spine until vision blurred and knees gave out. He would not scream. He never screamed. The Sith had always preached that pain was power, but few understood what it meant to live with pain that never ceased, pain that didn't inspire, pain that consumed. He stopped meditating the Jedi way, stopped seeking calm. Instead, he learned to ride the agony, to turn it inward and outward at once, to use it as fuel. When the armor constricted his chest, he channeled the pressure into focus. When it pierced the skin, he drew strength from the wound. When it whispered in hunger, he fed it fragments of the Force until it slept. It was a rhythm only he could feel, predator and prey in perfect balance. The Sith Lords before him had all sought control through domination of others. He sought control through mastery of self. If he could command the living armor, he could command anything. But control was never complete. It never would be, and he began to understand the deeper truth hiding inside the infection. He had not put it on. He had invited it in. The armor was not punishment. It was reflection, the physical mirror of what the Force had already made him, a creature half human, half hunger. The tombs whispered that every Sith is eventually devoured by their own creation. Most die before realizing it. He refused to be one of them, so he endured. Each day, he forced his body to obey through meditation and violence in equal measure. Each night, he repaired what the armor broke: tissue, bone, will. He recorded the progress in silence. His voice, distorted through metal and rasp, sounded like someone else. The armor resists, the will persists. I remain. He stopped counting years. Time dissolved in the constant hum of survival. The parasite grew wiser. So did he. They reached an understanding. It would keep him alive. He would keep it fed. Together, they were unstoppable. He no longer dreamed of removing it. He no longer wanted release. The pain had become purpose. The confinement, clarity. And though he could not feel the difference between armor and skin anymore, he found a strange comfort in it. Because when he looked in the mirror now, he saw no separation, no past, no weakness, only the prison, and within that prison the throne. The galaxy outside his tomb had forgotten his name. But he had not forgotten the galaxy. Even buried in the depths of Korriban, Darth Krayt watched, not with eyes, but through the currents of the Force, tracing the echoes of war that never truly ended. Empires rose, empires fell, and in every cycle he saw the same sickness, greed disguised as leadership, faith masquerading as hope, and peace, that fragile illusion always shattered by the same hands that built it. The Republic had died, but its ghost remained. The Jedi had returned, but weaker, fragmented by philosophy and pride. Even the Sith still fought among themselves, clinging to rules written by corpses. He studied them as a physician studies disease. Each conflict a symptom, each generation a relapse. The galaxy didn't need balance, it needed amputation. The parasite inside him pulsed when he thought that word, as if it agreed. It understood hunger, it understood pruning, and so did he. He began to see visions not of the past, but of what could be. Worlds united under one banner, planets ordered, efficient, silent, no counsel, no debate, only obedience. At first, he thought it was delusion, another fever born from infection. But the images didn't fade. They strengthened. They became prophecy. He started recording them, etching symbols into the walls of his chamber, carving patterns into the coral that covered his hands. Every mark was a fragment of the vision, every scar a map. The One Sith, he had spoken the name before, but now it meant something deeper, not a movement, not an order, a correction. The Sith before him had sought chaos, believing destruction brought freedom. But chaos was the natural state of the galaxy. Freedom was the disease. He saw the Force as a current with no direction, endless, wild, wasteful. He would give it direction. He would give it purpose. The armor tightened with every revelation, like the coral itself was listening, absorbing each word. Sometimes it whispered back in clicks and tremors, vibrating against his bones. He learned to hear meaning in the rhythm. It was not speech, but resonance, the communion of parasite and prophet. The galaxy's screams became quiet when he listened through it. He could sense entire systems dying without pain. He could feel stars collapse like heartbeats, and still, he felt nothing, only certainty. He began reaching out again, cautiously, through the shadows of the Force, not for help, for disciples, the broken, the forgotten. Those the Jedi had failed, the Sith had abandoned, and the Republic had left to rot. They found him one by one, drawn to the whispers that drifted from Korriban's dust. They did not see a man when they arrived. They saw a god made of scars and silence. He spoke little. When he did, his voice carried the weight of inevitability. The galaxy has tried freedom. It has tried balance. Both have failed. Now it will try obedience. The first converts called him master. He did not correct them. He showed them power through suffering. How pain could focus the Force, how loss could carve strength. They feared him, and he let them, because fear was Order's first language. He watched them build temples beneath the red sand, their devotion feeding the air with energy older than the Republic itself. He no longer needed to hunt power. Power came to him. The parasite pulsed in approval, veins glowing faintly beneath the armor. It had become the rhythm of his existence, each beat echoing the rise of his vision. When he slept, he dreamed of structure, of a galaxy with no rebellion, no debate, no failure, where every living thing moved as one, not through love, through necessity. The Force itself seemed to shift around him, not resisting, not embracing, simply yielding. And in that surrender, he saw truth. The Jedi chased peace, the Sith chased strength, but both were blind to the one thing that could hold the galaxy together: control. He was not a tyrant. He was a cure. The armor flared with light, the coral forming new ridges across his chest like living scripture. He traced them with his fingers, recognizing their pattern, not infection anymore, but design. The galaxy would soon wear the same marks, and through him, it would finally stop decaying. Time forgot him, but death did not claim him. Darth Krayt lived in defiance of both. The parasite never stopped. Each year, it claimed more of him: muscle, marrow, memory, and yet, he remained. Others would have fallen. Jedi would have surrendered to suffering. Sith would have been consumed by obsession. But he was no longer either. He was endurance made flesh, the will to outlast collapse. The One Sith grew in silence, hidden across deep space. Each follower trained in pain, discipline, purpose. They called him the immortal master, whispered of the agony he endured, feared the patience that shaped his rule. But none knew how close he had come to breaking. In the deepest cycles of the parasite's growth, he could not walk, could not speak, could not even meditate. The armor wrapped his chest so tightly that his heartbeat became irregular. His blood thinned, his skin grayed, his senses faltered. He lay still in the tomb chamber for 13 days, unmoving, alone. They thought he was dead. Some even prepared to take his place. And then, he woke. Not with a gasp, not with rage, with stillness. Because stillness was power, he did not punish those who doubted. He let them kneel again. Because he had become more than myth. He had become inevitability. There were whispers now. Of a Sith who could not die. Of a master who wore his own grave. Of a war that would come. And when it did, there would be no survivors, only submission. The coral inside him pulsed in rhythm with these rumors, as if feeding on belief. He welcomed it, because belief was a stronger weapon than fear, and both were stronger than hope. He traveled again. Not far, not wide, just enough to be seen. Once on Prakith, he appeared during a thunderstorm alone, cloaked, radiant with the dark side. He spoke to a gathering of Force cultists, and when he left, they destroyed their own leaders and sent their youth to Korriban. Once on Renvar, he stepped onto the snow just long enough to carve a message into the ice. No ship was seen, no trail remained. But days later, Jedi ruins burned, and no one took credit. He did not crave attention. He craved memory. He wanted the galaxy to remember that he existed, even if it had forgotten his name. Because names fade, but will endures. And he had not let go of his, not truly, not fully. Somewhere deep inside, the man still breathed. The one who walked the desert, the one who bled for peace, the one who buried his father beneath burning suns. But Krayt did not mourn him, he thanked him, because without A'Sharad Hett, there would have been no Krayt, no vision, no One Sith. Only more ghosts in the dust. He kept no portraits, no statues, no written chronicles, only silence, and in that silence, his power grew. Because while other Sith craved legacy, Krayt prepared to become it. His body would die. He knew that. The parasite would not stop. Even the Force had its limits. But the idea, the structure, the order, that would remain. Not just as doctrine, as design. He crafted contingency through alchemy, through teaching, through manipulation. Every disciple trained not to obey him, but to continue him. He was no longer teaching Sith. He was teaching replacements. The galaxy wouldn't have to choose him. It would inherit him. And when that day came, when the stars bent under banners of red and black, when Jedi temples crumbled without resistance, when the last republic fell without a scream, no one would ask how. Because the answer would be obvious. Darth Krayt never died. He only stopped being seen. He sat on his throne beneath the valley, surrounded by walls carved with names he no longer remembered. The armor pulsed slowly now, the pain constant, but there was peace in it, because he knew what came next. Not sleep, not rest. The next phase, the final storm. The moment when his will would no longer need a body to be obeyed. And when that moment arrived, the galaxy would not resist. It would submit, because it had already begun to forget how to disobey. The tombs of Korriban never slept, neither did he. While the galaxy moved on, Darth Krayt remained in the shadows, breathing with the dust, waiting with the dead. He had learned patience not from teachers, but from pain, and pain had taught him how to build without being seen. The Valley of the Dark Lord stretched behind him, hollow and quiet. It had once been the heart of the Sith, a graveyard for titans, a prison for ghosts. Now it was his crucible. He did not raise armies. He planted roots. The first followers came silently. A half-trained acolyte cast out by her master. A fallen Jedi who had killed during war, then was left to rot in peace. An assassin who no longer remembered which cause he served. They were not chosen for bloodlines, not for titles, for loss. Each one carried a wound the galaxy had refused to heal. And where the Jedi offered forgiveness, Krayt offered meaning. He did not preach. He whispered, "You were broken because you were alone. Now you are part of one will." They did not kneel because they feared him. They knelt because they were tired of choosing. The One Sith was not a council. It was not a brotherhood. It was structure. It was breath. Krayt built it beneath the surface, beneath cities, beneath alliances, beneath hope. He studied the old Sith empires and dissected their failure. Naga Sadow had used deception. Exar Kun had used fear. Revan had used memory. Sidious had used control. Each of them had taken from the galaxy. Each had tried to own it. And each had fallen because they misunderstood something Krayt now saw clearly. The galaxy did not need to be ruled. It needed to be reshaped. He trained his disciples differently. No names, only roles. They were not allowed to call themselves lords. Not yet. Rank was not given for destruction. It was earned through silence. The more a Sith could disappear, the more Krayt trusted them. They were taught to feel the Force, not as fire, but as ice cold, patient, without indulgence. Every moment of hesitation was weakness. Every outburst, a flaw. Where the Jedi told their students to let go, Krayt taught his to hold everything until it hurt, and then turn that hurt into form. Each initiate learned to kill, but more importantly, they learned to obey. One mind, one will, one Sith. He didn't repeat it. He didn't need to. The armor had become his sermon. The parasite inside him, still growing, still feeding, was the clearest example of what it meant to be one. Suffering made you sharper. Obedience made you whole. He kept the old tombs intact. Let them rot slowly. Let the wind carve their names into dust. Because he wanted the future to be built not on history, but in spite of it. He buried holocrons, burned scrolls, erased symbols. What mattered was not where the Sith came from, only where they would go next. The Yuuzhan Vong War had shattered the galaxy in ways even the Jedi could not fully mend. Entire systems were still bleeding. Trust was gone. The Force had been scarred. And while others tried to heal the wound, Krayt built his fortress inside it. He called it the Temple of the One. Not a temple for worship. A temple for rebirth. Hidden deep within Korriban's crust, it pulsed with energy not found in nature. He did not need legions. He needed believers. By the time the galaxy noticed the change in its shadow, it would already be too late. Because Darth Krayt had learned what the old Sith never did. Conquest doesn't begin with violence. It begins with silence. The rule of two had been a lie. That was the first truth Krayt taught. Bane's vision had lasted 1,000 years, hiding Sith beneath shadows while the Jedi grew arrogant in the light. It had worked until it didn't, because Sidious had risen, and Sidious had fallen. And when the dust settled, all that remained was emptiness. No heirs, no legacy, only echoes. Krayt saw the flaw not in the ambition, but in the numbers. 2 was not strength. 2 was fear. Fear that another voice would rise. Fear that a new Sith would disrupt the old. Fear that control would be lost if shared. But control, Krayt believed, was not meant to be hoarded. It was meant to be unified. He called it the doctrine of one. Not one master and one apprentice. Not a dynasty, not a circle of equals. One Sith, one will, one voice speaking through many. There would be no secrets, no rivalries, no betrayals hidden in the dark, only loyalty, only order, only the word of the Master. Some resisted. They had come from chaos, raised in a galaxy that praised individual power. They were used to climbing over corpses, used to fighting for dominance. But Krayt did not ask for their respect. He demanded their surrender. You are not here to become Sith. You are here to become me. And when they faltered, he showed them pain, not through punishment, through clarity. He stripped them of identity, burned names from their minds, carved purpose into their backs with the Force. Each failure was corrected with silence. Each weakness answered with the hiss of a lightsaber held inches from the throat. Not to kill, to remind. Krayt taught that the dark side was not rage. Rage burned too fast. He taught patience, discipline, self-destruction in the name of control. His armor, pulsing with living coral, became a symbol, not of strength, of cost. They saw the pain he lived in, the way his body fought itself each hour, and still he stood, still he taught, still he ruled, because pain was truth, and truth was loyalty. When one of his students killed another to rise in rank, Krayt did not stop him, but he did not reward him either. Instead, he said, "You sought power by ending a rival, but you only proved you are afraid of equals." The assassin starved in isolation for 9 days. When he returned, he bowed lower, and never questioned again. The One Sith grew, not through violence, but through belief. Each new disciple was taught to forget what they had been, to abandon old names, lost planets, broken families. Their only name now was Sith. Their only family was one. They were the blade. Krayt was the hilt. Without him, they had no direction. Without them, he had no reach. He created a hierarchy shaped like a body. Hands to strike, eyes to watch, voices to whisper, but only one mind. His. They built a network across the galaxy, quiet, slow, surgical. No wars, no invasions, just presence. A whisper in the Jedi Temple, a shadow in the Senate, a rumor among smugglers. The galaxy didn't notice, because the One Sith didn't want to be noticed. Not yet. Krayt's doctrine taught that power is not taken. It is inherited when no one is strong enough to hold it. So they waited, they listened, and they prepared. The rule of two had created a legacy of fear. Krayt replaced it with faith, but it was not faith in destiny, not in prophecy, only in him. And if any questioned that, if any imagined a future without his will guiding them, he had only to remove his mask. Let them see what the dark side had carved into his body. Let them hear the rasp of breath stolen by coral. Let them feel, for a moment, what it meant to live without end, but not without pain. They always knelt deeper afterward, always, because Krayt did not rule through inspiration. He ruled through example, and his example was this: obedience does not make you weak, it makes you whole. The galaxy's forgotten always hear the call first. Darth Krayt knew this. He had once been one of them. So when he sent his reach beyond Korriban, he did not look for warriors. He looked for wounds. The Jedi had left many, abandoned apprentices, lost Padawans whose masters died in the Clone Wars, children who touched the Force but were told they were too old, too poor, too dangerous. The Empire had left more. Stormtroopers discarded. After service, agents who had seen too much. Assassins whose orders stopped coming. And then there were the Vong War survivors. entire worlds broken by living weapons, their faith in peace burned to ash. Krayt found them all. He found them in prisons, in gutters, in temples that no longer sang. And he spoke the words that always reached the broken. The Force has not forgotten you. It has been waiting for you to stop pretending you are healed. Some came willingly, most resisted. But the weak never resisted for long. He showed them the truth that the Jedi only saved what could be redeemed, that the Republic only rebuilt what it could still use. Everyone else was debris. And debris belonged to him. He sent his emissaries, robed shadows, trained to whisper rather than fight. They appeared on worlds scarred by memory. Malachor, Duro, Aether, even Ossus. Each step taken like a priest visiting a grave. Wherever they walked, the air changed. People stopped hoping. They started remembering. Some Force sensitives joined out of vengeance. Some out of despair. But many out of something deeper, relief. Relief that someone finally admitted what the galaxy refused to say aloud. That peace had failed. The Jedi Code spoke of serenity. Yet they hid behind temples when the weak starved. The Sith of old spoke of freedom, yet they bound themselves in their own chains. Krayt offered neither mercy nor liberation. He offered certainty. To a smuggler haunted by the ghosts of Nar Shaddaa, he promised clarity. To a fallen knight drowning in guilt, he promised purpose. To a family of Vong-altered refugees, he promised belonging. He kept every promise, though not as they expected. The smuggler became a spy whose heartbeat stopped on command. The fallen knight became an inquisitor, her empathy carved into discipline. The refugees became builders of the Temple of the One. Their coral scars turned to architecture. Each of them found meaning, even as individuality faded. That was the gift. And the cost. Krayt never pretended it was otherwise. He stood before his growing legion and told them plainly, "You are not chosen, you are reclaimed." He said it softly, the way one might speak to the dead. And they listened. Because every broken soul wants to believe their suffering was not wasted. Among them walked Sith purebloods, descendants of Korriban's earliest lords, long exiled by the Empire's human rule. They saw in Krayt's vision the restoration of their forgotten heritage. They bowed lower than any human ever had. Among them walked Miriolans, Twi'leks, Chagrians, and even Mandalorian species the Jedi had once called allies. Now they trained under a single banner, stripped of color, creed, and past. Each swore the same vow: I am not alone, I am not free, I am one. And so, the One Sith became not a cult but a contagion. It spread quietly through systems too tired to resist. Politicians began to listen, smugglers began to serve, planets began to disappear from record. Every conquest was invisible, every victory inevitable. Krayt watched from his throne, the coral across his chest pulsing like a second heart. He could feel the infection growing not just in his flesh, but across the stars. The galaxy itself was becoming his reflection. The Jedi did not notice. The Republic did not care. Both were rebuilding, praising themselves for survival while rot spread beneath their feet. It amused him, because that was how corruption always began, quietly. When the first hidden fleet was completed en route, he stood before his followers and said only one thing: the galaxy believes the Force divides us into light and dark. They are wrong. The Force was never divided. We were. The chamber fell silent. Every warrior bowed. Every scar pulsed red beneath the torchlight. Krayt closed his eyes. The infection burned inside him, relentless. But he smiled through the pain, because for the first Time in generations, the Sith were not divided. They were one. The galaxy thought the war was over. The Yuuzhan Vong were defeated. The Jedi had returned. The Republic had been reborn as the Galactic Alliance. And for the first time in a long time, the stars felt quiet. But peace is not the absence of war. It is the breath between disasters. And Krayt was still breathing. Beneath the crust of forgotten worlds, his followers multiplied. New temples, new armor, new weapons forged without celebration. No parades, no declarations. Only silence, because the One Sith did not crave attention. They craved alignment. He watched the Senate rebuild, watched the Jedi Council debate. He listened as the galaxy forgave itself too quickly. And he waited. Patience was not strategy, it was survival. His body was failing. The Vong parasites had burrowed deeper than ever, reshaping his cells faster than he could resist. Some days he couldn't stand, others he could barely speak. He trained his inner circle to interpret gestures, to read his movements like scripture. One glance meant silence, a breath meant readiness, and when he moved his hand, people died. But he remained, because will was stronger than blood, and death, like power, could be postponed. He turned to stasis chambers, hibernation fields, Sith healing rituals so ancient their names had no translation. Each brought him moments of clarity, but never peace. He did not want peace. Peace is what the Jedi had died chasing. He chased permanence. The galaxy was still fractured, borders redrawn, alliances fragile, Jedi divided by philosophy. No one was ready for another war. That was the point. He knew it would not take armies to win. It would take weakness, and weakness had returned. Systems tired of the Alliance's taxes. Families blamed the Jedi for the war's scars. Local warlords rose quietly, unchecked. The Jedi reached out with compassion. Krayt reached out with certainty. He began seeding agents in places that would never be noticed. Not high offices, low ones, border patrols, dock workers, academy teachers, cartographers. Not to control, to listen. When the time came, they would not strike, they would vanish, and no one would understand why the stars felt smaller. He looked at the galaxy like a physician examines a sick patient. It was not about curing it. It was about keeping it alive long enough to accept treatment. The One Sith had infiltrated trade routes, financial systems, shipyards. No one had noticed. Because they didn't want to. The galaxy was too eager to believe the worst was behind it. That's how decay works. You don't feel it. You adjust to it. And by the time the pain returns, the damage is already done. Krayt's vision didn't require conquest. It required collapse. He didn't need to destroy the Jedi. He needed them to lose faith in themselves. And slowly, they did. They argued. They hesitated. They apologized. And all the while, his infection both inside his body and across the stars spread. When the first hyperspace lanes began to fail, he said nothing. When outer rim systems quietly disappeared from records, he waited. When force disturbances became too frequent to ignore, he smiled. Because the galaxy was unraveling on its own, he simply helped it forget how to resist. The One Sith became folklore, a myth whispered in cantinas. Children called Krayt the Red Shadow. Some said he was a ghost, others a god. No one believed he was real, and that was his final strategy. Not fear, forgetfulness. Because when a wound is ignored long enough, it begins to feel normal. And when it reopens suddenly, violently, it's already too late to stop the bleeding. He sat in his chamber, the coral having fused across his chest, his limbs cold, breath shallow. He was dying, he had been dying for years, but death would not matter. Because the structure had already been built, and when the galaxy finally screamed again, it would scream in his language. It would call for unity, and it would receive a name. Darth Krayt. It did not begin with a declaration. No one shouted. No alarms sounded. The fall of the fell empire began the way all true tragedies do, quietly. In the final years of peace, while the Jedi watched distant worlds and Ronfell sat on his throne, believing his empire secure, Darth Krayt moved. He had no need for an armada, no need for political theater. Because the war was already over before the galaxy even knew there was one. His One Sith had infiltrated every rank, every corner of the fell military. Loyalists bowed beside traitors. Commanders gave orders from both sides of the war, wearing the same armor. It was not sabotage. It was surrender, planned, coordinated, patient. The first move was made on Bastion, the symbolic heart of the Empire. On the surface, everything appeared normal. Shifts changed, transports landed, security protocols ran quietly. But under those stone corridors, Krayt's agents were already in position, sleepers activated, power nodes were sabotaged, fleet orders were altered mid-broadcast. When the first bolt of red fire struck a command tower, it was too late. Turbolasers lit the skies above Bastion, not in battle, but in betrayal. A third of the defense force turned on the others. The rest never had a chance, and the Emperor never received the distress call, because the transmission never left orbit. At the exact same hour, Coruscant changed hands. No fleet invasion, no siege, no fanfare, just precision. Sith assassins emerged inside Senate offices. Fleet officers were found dead in their private homes. And in the upper reaches of the Jedi Temple, a shadow passed across the council chamber floor. No one saw it, because there was no one left to witness it. By the time the Jedi realized what had happened, Darth Krayt was already standing in the High Council Tower, not as a guest, not as a challenger. As the ruler of Coruscant, the galaxy's center didn't fall. It was taken, because no one had been watching, and those who were, had already joined him. This was not a conquest of weapons. It was a collapse of assumptions. Everyone believed the rule of two had made the Sith extinct. Everyone believed the dark side had been defeated with Palpatine. Everyone believed the Jedi would sense another threat in time. They were wrong, because belief was all they had left. And Krayt had built something else. He replaced intelligence with infiltration. He replaced diplomacy with corrosion. He replaced war with timing. And when he struck, it was not with fury. It was with finality. The Jedi were too few, too scattered, too uncertain of their place in the new galaxy. They had barely survived the Vong War. They had not healed. And now, there would be no time to. Within a week, Jedi outposts began to burn. Names disappeared from archives. Ship registries were erased. Communications went dark, and then came the new symbol. It didn't roar like the Imperial crest. It didn't shimmer like the Republic seal. It burned. The red insignia of the One Sith was stamped across every hall on Coruscant. On ships, on datapads, on holoscreens, it carried no message, no speech, no promise. Just the shape of a new reality. Ronfell escaped, barely, fleeing into the unknown regions with a loyal few. Some said he vanished, others said he was killed, but no official death was ever confirmed. That was the genius of Krayt's coup. He didn't replace a living symbol. He erased it until even those who remembered it began to question if it ever mattered. In a single, precise sweep, Darth Krayt had taken the galaxy, and he had done it without firing a shot on the Senate floor. Because he didn't need to destroy the old order, he needed it to surrender first, and it did. Roan Fel had always believed he could control the dark. He had grown up inside its shadow, raised by an empire rebuilt from the bones of the old one. But even an emperor cannot see what hides inside loyalty. When Bastion fell, he told himself it was a mistake, a failure of command, a tactical misstep. It wasn't. It was a message. The Sith had not returned in fire. They had returned in flesh, in uniforms, in ranks, in faces he trusted. They stood beside him in court. They saluted him during ceremony. They drank to his victories. And when the moment came, they turned. The betrayal began in orbit. Fleet Admiral Morrigan, once a war hero, transmitted false orders through the holonet. Entire battalions were redirected away from the core. Convoys vanished. Fuel supplies were delayed. Every delay made sense. Every explanation fit. Until the gates opened. Krayt's hidden fleet did not descend from hyperspace with banners. It appeared as if summoned, ships slipping from the void like predators emerging from black water. By the time Fel's command realized it, the capital's defense grid had already been rewritten. Krayt didn't conquer Coruscant. He invited himself in. Inside the Imperial Palace, Roan Fel fought for every hallway. His royal guards, elite, unflinching, stood their ground even as their own numbers turned. Blades clashed, blasters scorched marble, blood mixed with ash, and still he believed he could hold the throne, until Darth Maladi arrived. Once an Imperial advisor, now a creature draped in crimson and poison. She bowed before him, not in fealty, but in mockery. "Your empire endures, my lord," she whispered. "Just not under you." Behind her, the new emperor stepped forward, a perfect mirror of Fel's presence, wearing imperial robes, bearing his likeness. An illusion sustained by Sith alchemy. A puppet, forged to preserve the illusion of continuity. To the galaxy, Roan Fel still ruled. But his orders no longer reached his people. His voice had been replaced by Krayt's. The deception was flawless, the transition seamless. Worlds obeyed. Senators complied. The fleet swore allegiance to an emperor who was no longer alive in the eyes of his throne. Roan Fel escaped only through loyalty, the last true kind. Moff Nina Calixte betrayed her own post to create a false death report. His body was found in the ruins. A coffin was displayed. The people mourned, and the galaxy moved on. He vanished into the unknown regions, carrying the last spark of resistance. A handful of soldiers, a handful of Jedi, and one purpose: to survive. But Krayt didn't care that Fel lived. He wanted him to, because legends of survival are louder than proofs of death. Every whispered rumor of Roan Fel, hiding among the stars, served the same purpose. It reminded the galaxy that hope was weak, that rebellion was myth. Meanwhile, Krayt's puppet ruled flawlessly. Decrees were issued, taxes collected, loyalty enforced. The galaxy bowed to a ghost. Behind the scenes, Krayt governed through his Sith Lords. Maladi controlled intelligence. Nihil commanded fleets. Wlock, his silent shadow, interpreted his will. Each served without question. Each believed they were essential, and Krayt encouraged it because belief kept them blind. In the official archives, the new regime was called the Second Imperial Peace. It promised stability, order, prosperity, and it delivered all of it. Because people do not rebel when their lives improve. They rebel when their hope returns. Krayt made sure it didn't. He gave the galaxy exactly what it thought it wanted. And that was the cruelest deception of all. On Bastion, the true Emperor watched the stars from exile, knowing what his people could not. He knew that peace built on illusion could not last. He knew the Sith had patience. And he knew one day the mask on the throne would crack. But not yet. For now, Darth Krayt ruled both the living and the dead. He had replaced an emperor without killing him. He had conquered a galaxy without invading it. And he had proven the one truth. Every Sith before him had ignored power is not taken by force. It is taken by trust. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant had stood for over 20,000 years. It had been rebuilt, destroyed, and rebuilt again. But this time, it would not rise. When the One Sith took the world, there was no siege, no armies, no heroics, only silence. The temple's halls had already been emptied by fear. Its archives had been locked, its gates sealed, its masters scattered. Most Jedi believed the battle would come elsewhere on Bastion, perhaps, or Ossus. They were wrong. It came in the night, without fire, without warning. Black ships descended through the clouds and landed without resistance. The city's security grid had been rewritten days earlier. The Senate had been instructed to ignore the noise. By dawn, the banners of the One Sith hung across the temple's spires. The first to enter was Darth Nihil, tall, pale, silent. He walked through the grand entrance alone, his boots echoing against the marble floor. He did not ignite his blade. He did not need to. Every guard who saw him hesitated and died before they drew breath. In the meditation halls, the air was heavy with ghosts. The walls still remembered the voices of masters teaching peace, of children laughing, of hope. Nihil paused once, as if listening to them fade. Then he ordered the cleansing to begin. Troopers moved in without words. Files were taken, holocrons seized, statues broken. The temple did not fall in battle. It was stripped bare, piece by piece, memory by memory. On the upper levels, Darth Malady entered the archives. She ran her fingers across the ancient consoles, humming softly. So much knowledge, so much faith, and so much blindness. You recorded everything, she whispered, except how to survive. She flooded the servers with red code. Centuries of teachings deleted in minutes. The holographic records of Yoda, of Kenobi, of Skywalker, all erased. Every Jedi secret that had once been protected was now dust. When the sun rose, crimson light spilled through the stained glass windows of the main hall. And standing in that glow was Darth Krayt. He did not walk quickly. He did not raise his saber. He simply stood, breathing through the rasp of armor that had become his body. The temple greeted him with silence, and he returned it. He could feel the echo of the Force here, thin, fragile, uncertain. The Jedi had not abandoned it. It had abandoned them. He reached the central dais, where the council had once met, and placed a single hand on the table. The stone cracked beneath his palm. "Peace is a lie," he said softly. And so was the order that believed in it. His words carried through the empty halls like a eulogy. Outside, the city below stirred but did not resist. Coruscant had survived too many wars. Its people no longer cared who ruled, as long as the power stayed consistent. And so, they watched from their towers as the banners changed. Blue became red, gold became black, hope became order. Inside, the last Jedi defenders fell. Some fled through secret tunnels, others surrendered. Krayt let them go, because their survival would serve him better than their deaths. He wanted them to remember. to carry the story of their failure wherever they hid, to make sure the name Darth Krayt became synonymous with inevitability. By the end of the day, the temple was quiet again. No flames, no smoke. Only stillness. In the chamber of the great window, where once the masters had watched the skyline, Krayt gave his final order. Leave it standing. The Sith looked to him in confusion. Why not destroy it? One asked. Krayt turned, his voice calm. Because monuments to failure are more powerful than ruins. He walked away, the light behind him dimming to shadow. As night fell, the temple remained a shell of what it had been, its spires sharp against the blood-colored sky. The city adjusted, life went on, and the galaxy accepted the new order as if it had always been there. In the Force, something shifted. Not darkness, not light, just absence. The Jedi were gone, the temple still stood, and in that contradiction, the Sith had won. The galaxy did not burn under Darth Krayt. It froze. He did not rule through war. He ruled through silence. A silence so total, so complete, that even dissent felt like noise too loud to speak. From the throne on Coruscant, his voice echoed through holonets, through systems, through the marrow of imperial law. He did not shout, he did not demand, he simply told the galaxy what was true. The Sith were order, the Jedi were chaos, and the Empire would be eternal. Across the mid-rim, worlds fell into line. Governors pledged loyalty not out of fear, but fatigue. No more wars. No more shifting governments. No more Jedi chasing ghosts. Krayt promised a future with no more uncertainty, and the galaxy accepted. But under that surface, the cracks began to widen. His One Sith were bound by a single will. They were not brothers. They were not rivals. They were tools, trained to obey, conditioned to serve. Their red blades did not burn with anger. They burned with emptiness. In this doctrine, betrayal was treason, doubt was disease. And yet even Krayt, the architect of this empire, knew what he had built was not permanent, because beneath the armor, his body was still dying. The Yuuzhan Vong coral seeds grafted to his bones had grown restless. The armor itched, twitched, pierced deeper. Each breath was war, each step, defiance. He sat alone for hours, meditating not to find peace, but to survive the next hour. There were no healers who could reach him, no Sith he trusted to try. Only Darth Wlock, the one servant allowed to speak against him, the one shadow permitted to question the light. Wlock had already begun to study ways to extend his master's life, to manipulate death itself, to reach into the Force and bend it around Krayt's soul. But even he knew time was running out, and so Krayt accelerated his plans. He ordered the Jedi hunted, not just for revenge, but to remove any chance of a future outside his will. He sought Cade Skywalker, not because of legacy, but because the boy carried something pure, something unbroken, the blood of Anakin, the lineage of Luke, a threat not of armies, but of memory. If Cade survived, then legacy did too, and Krayt needed to be the last chapter. Meanwhile, Roan Fel's loyalists grew in number. From their exile in the Outer Rim, they began to move like shadows behind walls. They whispered through smugglers, ex-Imperials, bounty hunters, even Sith sympathizers who had seen too much. They didn't seek to defeat Krayt, they sought to outlive him. Because death was the one truth even Krayt couldn't rewrite. In the lower levels of Coruscant, people began to vanish. Not because of rebellion, because of questions. Where had the Jedi gone? Why did the Emperor never appear in person? What was the One Sith really for? And the answers never came. Because fear had replaced knowledge. The Jedi Temple stood empty, untouched, its spires like spears in the sky. Krayt let it rot, because it served as a reminder, not of what was lost but of what would never return. He believed his control was complete, that his empire would last beyond his body, that the One Sith would carry his vision into centuries. But deep within himself, a voice still whispered, not the Force, not the armor, a memory of Tatooine, of sand, of a father who died for honor, of a code that preached peace through control. All of it gone, all of it burned away. He had become something else, but not something more. The cracks in the Empire were the same cracks in him, slow, hidden, widening. Every system conquered brought peace. But peace built on fear was already war. And Krayt, for all his power, could feel the galaxy beginning to exhale, beginning to remember, beginning to resist. Not yet, but soon. In the ashes of the fell empire, a seed had survived. And seeds, even beneath stone, still reach for light. In the age of empires, loyalty rarely survives understanding. Darth Wlock once believed he understood his master. He was wrong. He had been Krayt's voice when the Emperor could no longer speak, his interpreter when pain drowned words, his keeper of secrets when even shadows had begun to whisper. For decades, Wlock obeyed without question. He read the texts Krayt could no longer hold. He listened to the dying man's rasp echo through the throne chamber and translated it into commands that shaped worlds. He was the bridge between a god and his worshippers. And yet, in that closeness, something began to change. He saw the coral armor pulsating faster. He watched Krayt's body twist each day, the Yuuzhan Vong infection spreading like fire beneath flesh. He heard the crack in the Master's voice when he tried to speak the word eternal. The One Sith had been built on perfection, one will, one mind, one vision. But Wlock began to see that the One was dying. He did not hate Krayt, he revered him. He believed him the greatest Sith since Bane. But even greatness must eventually give way to necessity. And necessity whispered that the Order could not survive a corpse. Every meditation ended in agony. Every command was slower than the last. The servants pretended not to notice, but they did. They saw their emperor struggling to stand. They heard him breathe like a machine barely alive. Rumors began to ripple through the ranks that Krayt had lost the Force, that the infection was eating his mind, that the Master who promised immortality could not even save himself. Wlock silenced every voice. But silence is not the same as loyalty. He watched the cracks spread through the doctrine of one. He saw Sith Lords begin to hesitate before answering the call. He saw doubt return, an echo of the very weakness they had sworn to erase. And so, he came to a decision, not as a traitor, but as a guardian. He would preserve Krayt's vision by removing the man who could no longer protect it. To Wlock, it was not betrayal, it was duty. He began studying ancient texts far older than the Empire itself. Scrolls that spoke of transferring will beyond flesh. Holocrons that whispered of souls bound to armor, of power that lived through belief. Perhaps, he thought, Krayt's death would not be death at all. Perhaps it would be release. But that was only justification. In truth, Wlock had begun to believe that the galaxy no longer needed Darth Krayt. It needed someone who could finish what he started. He told no one. He moved carefully, as he always had. He continued to serve in the Emperor's presence, kneeling, obeying, pretending to listen. And when Krayt's rage would erupt, when the infection burned him from within, Wlock would kneel lower still and whisper calm into chaos. "My lord, rest. The galaxy is already yours." But in his mind, Another voice answered, "Not for long." In time, Krayt began to speak of renewal. He claimed he would cast off his dying flesh, purge the Von corruption, and rise again. He said he had seen it in a vision, rebirth through pain. To his followers, these words were prophecy. To Wlock, they were delusion. No being could conquer decay, not even a god. He began to record every symptom, every weakness, every lapse in focus. He told himself he was preparing for transition, preparing the Order for a world without its creator. But the truth was simpler. He had stopped believing, and when belief dies, loyalty follows. Krayt's dream was already changing without him. Wlock could feel it. He saw new Sith rising who did not know the Master's pain, who did not feel bound by his suffering. They served the Empire, not the man. Soon even his name would be legend. And legends, Wlock thought, should die beautifully. He began to plan the moment, not with malice, but precision. It would be quiet, merciful, a single act that would preserve the dream forever. The servant who had given his life to the Master would now give the Master to death. Because the galaxy, he told himself, must never see its god grow weak. Korriban never sleeps. Its storms move endlessly, dragging sand across the bones of dead gods. It was there that Darth Krayt retreated to heal or to die. The tombs obeyed no one. Their whispers belonged to no living voice, but Wlock heard them as clearly as he heard his own thoughts. He told himself this was mercy, that what he was about to do was not rebellion, but release. The Master's pain had become the Empire's, and mercy, he reasoned, was just another form of control. For weeks, he watched Krayt's meditations turn to convulsions. He saw the Von armor split open, the coral shifting like a second spine. Every time Krayt emerged from stasis, his body looked less human. His eyes burned red with constant fever. Still, he spoke of destiny. Still, he demanded progress. "We are not yet perfect," Krayt rasped. "The galaxy remains unshaped." But the galaxy no longer cared who shaped it. The Empire functioned without him. Orders continued. Wars ended. The One Sith obeyed out of habit. And habit, Wlock knew, was not faith. The day came when Krayt summoned him alone. The Emperor sat on a stone throne carved from the wall itself, his breathing wet, uneven. The coral plates pulsed like a dying heart. "I can see it in your eyes," Krayt said. "You think I am finished." Wlock knelt. "My lord, you are eternal." Krayt smiled weakly. "Lies, but I forgive them." He rose slowly, bones creaking beneath living armor. He stepped toward the holomap projecting the galaxy. His fingers hovered over the outer rim. "There," he said. "Ossus. The Jedi remain. We will burn them soon." His hand trembled. The map flickered. He turned. "You will lead them." And that was the moment, the smallest pause, the quietest breath. In that pause, Wlock decided. He rose from the floor, drew his saber, and ignited crimson light. Krayt did not flinch. He only looked tired. "You would strike down your master." Wlock's voice did not tremble. "I would preserve your dream." The blades met once briefly. Sparks scattered across the throne room like dying stars. Krayt's strength still lived in the Force, but his body betrayed him. Each swing was slower than the last, each step heavier. The coral writhed across his chest, trying to heal, trying to fight. But the infection that had kept him alive now devoured him. Wlock advanced. His voice was calm, almost sorrowful. "You taught us to destroy weakness. You said the Sith must evolve. Then let us begin with you." Krayt struck again, rage burning brighter than his blade. The chamber shook, stone split. Lightning cracked through the air. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might win. He always had before. But Wlock was ready. He caught the Emperor's wrist, twisted, and plunged his saber through the armor's core. The coral screamed a sound like tearing metal and flesh together. Light spilled from the wound. Krayt staggered back, eyes wide. He reached for the Force, but the galaxy gave him silence. Even the dead on Korriban seemed to turn away. He fell to his knees. For a moment, the storm outside went still. "You think this ends me," he whispered. "You know nothing of the Force." Wlock lowered his blade. "It is not an end, my lord, only correction." And with a single motion, he struck once more. The light faded. The armor went still. The master was dead. The chamber filled with silence, so complete it felt holy. The servant stood above the corpse and exhaled, as if releasing centuries of obedience. He knelt not in regret, but ritual. "Your will continues," he said softly, "through me." Outside, lightning returned, splitting the sky. The tomb shook, but no one came. The Emperor's death was hidden, like everything else the Sith ever loved. And when Wlock left the chamber, he did not look back. He carried no guilt, no fear, no triumph, only purpose. The galaxy would never know that Darth Krayt had fallen. It would only know that the One Sith remained whole. Because the greatest lie a Sith can tell is that his master still breathes. The galaxy believed him dead, and for a moment, that lie became the only truth left in the minds of his followers. Darth Wlock claimed that Krayt had passed peacefully into the Force, his will eternal, his vision intact. The One Sith marched forward under this illusion. But beneath the sands of Korriban, within the suffocating dark of a stasis chamber, Darth Krayt dreamed, and his dreams were filled with pain. The armor still clung to him, still fed on him. The coral seeds had not stopped growing. Even in death, they pulsed like a second heartbeat. Every breath, every second, felt like drowning beneath an ocean of molten iron. But Krayt did not die like ordinary men. His spirit wandered the Force, clinging to what remained of his power. Rage kept him tethered. Betrayal gave him shape. And the cold fire of revenge became his only warmth. In time, the darkness began to shift. The stasis shell fractured, not from outside intrusion but from within. His flesh had become something other. Something twisted beyond recognition. The Vong parasites had grown into jagged armor. The man beneath was gone. What remained was raw, perfect hate. He awoke without screaming. There was no voice left. Only silence, only purpose. The Sith who returned was not A'Sharad Hett. He was not the warrior who walked among Jedi, not the hermit who wandered the ruins of war, not even the tyrant who founded the One Sith. This creature, this revenant, was something colder, sharper, simplified, a being made only of need and fury. He did not call for his acolytes. He did not summon Darth Wlock. Instead, he walked the halls of Korriban alone, slowly, without urgency. The ancient statues of the Sith Lords did not speak. They watched, and in their stillness, he understood their final lesson. There was no legacy worth preserving, no tradition worth honoring, no code that had ever saved them. Power alone was truth, not power shared, not power divided between master and apprentice. That idea had already failed. He had already been betrayed by it. When Darth Wlock finally saw him, finally felt the echo of his return ripple through the Force, it was already too late. There were no words exchanged. There was no room left for debate. The duel that followed lasted less than a minute. Wlock summoned all the dark knowledge he had spent a lifetime mastering. All his tricks, all his telepathy, all his mind illusions. and none of it worked. Krayt did not need to resist them. They passed through him as if he was smoke and stone. He broke Wlock's mind first, then his body, then his name. With no witnesses and no ritual, Krayt erased him from the order he had corrupted. He called him false. He called him weak. But most of all, he called him expected. Because betrayal was never a surprise, it was prophecy. The One Sith, now leaderless, felt a shift ripple across the stars. Some knelt immediately. Others hesitated. None resisted for long. But something was different now. The Krayt who returned no longer spoke of balance, no longer warned of galactic chaos. Those had been illusions, distractions, justifications made by a man who still believed he could fix what was broken. This Krayt no longer believed in fixing anything. He believed only in rule. The resurrection changed more than his body. It changed how he viewed the Force. No longer a storm to be survived. Now it was a blade, and he was its edge. He had embraced what the Jedi called unnatural, had outlived every vision of the future they tried to protect, had become what they feared most. A Sith who could not die, not because of prophecy, not because of chosen one myths, but because he refused. He rebuilt his throne. He spoke again to his followers, but his words were fewer now, sharper. His commands were not debated. His philosophy was not taught. It was enforced. Where once his empire was shaped by ideals, unity, strength, vision, it now bent to silence and fear. Darth Krayt had returned, but what returned was not a man. It was something worse, something the galaxy had no name for. And as the stars turned and rebellion stirred, and ancient bloodlines began to rise again, he simply waited, because the moment would come when they would challenge him. And when they did, he would show them that death had only made him stronger. There was no funeral, no procession, no monument built for the Sith who died. Darth Krayt returned, and the galaxy was not told. The Holonet said nothing. The Jedi did not feel him. The Empire did not declare it. But across the dark currents of the Force, something shifted. A tremor deeper than death. The kind of change that did not echo. It swallowed. He was not healing. He was evolving. The coral armor had fused to bone. His veins pumped with Vong biotech that once devoured him. Now it served him. The pain that once screamed in every motion had dulled into constant pressure. A heartbeat of agony that became rhythm. Every second reminded him of what he had overcome. Every breath reminded him of what he had become. He no longer needed to hide it. He no longer feared the decay. Krayt walked the ruins of ancient Sith tombs without memory or reverence. Where once he sought their wisdom, now he felt only pity. Marka Ragnos, Tulak Horde, Ajunta Pol. Lords of the old Sith who died clutching broken codes and failed dynasties. They fought for power, but none of them could keep it. They died with students at their throats, each one a symbol of tradition. Tradition was death. The Jedi worshipped legacy. The Sith worshipped lineage. But Krayt worshipped nothing. He did not see himself as part of a cycle. He was the hand that would end it. The One Sith obeyed, not because they believed, but because they feared. Fear worked. He no longer trained them with words. He broke them with silence. Their pain became their path. Their obedience became their belief. Those who hesitated vanished. Those who questioned disappeared. There was no rule of two, no council of lords, no pyramid, no titles, no masks, just power. And him, he sent new shadows across the stars, not to conquer, but to weaken. His war was not one of battlefronts. It was one of erosion, piece by piece. the resistance would fracture, the Jedi would scatter again, the fell loyalists would turn against one another. And when the time was right, he would strike not with fire but with hunger. But even as his vision sharpened, something else stirred. Visions returned, not memories, not dreams, but glimpses. A boy standing alone in white armor, facing the throne. A girl, eyes full of light, raising a blade not of Jedi design. And a scar not on his body, but on the Force itself. He could not see their names, but he knew they were coming. It was not fear that touched him, it was familiarity, because he had stood where they would stand. Long ago, before the mask, before the grave, before the lie, and yet, he did not prepare a defense. He welcomed them, because if they came to end him, then they would learn what he had become. Not a Sith Lord, not a man twisted by time, but something ancient, something final. In the silence of Korriban's deepest chamber, beneath stone and ash and the ghosts of failures long dead, Darth Krayt sat. And he listened, not to the whispers of the past, but to the silence of the future, waiting for it to speak. Because he knew, the end was near, but it would not be his. The body was broken, shattered by betrayal, drained by war, hollowed by time. But in the dark chambers beneath Korriban, where no light dared linger, something ancient stirred again. Not a soul, not a spark, but a will, a command that refused to end. Darth Krayt did not rise from the grave by chance. He was pulled back through ritual, through pain, through Sith alchemy that tore at the threads of death itself. And when he opened his eyes again, there was no confusion, no gasp for air, no question of what had happened. Only purpose. He remembered everything. The silence of death had not frightened him. It had taught him. In death, he saw the truth of power, that flesh meant nothing. That legacy was a chain. That vision pure and undiluted could not be buried. His armor, once a prison of Yuuzhan Vong Korral, was no longer a parasite. It pulsed with him now, moved with him. It had become his skin. The pain that once racked his every nerve was gone. Not because he had healed, but because he had transcended it. Suffering had become so constant, so familiar. It faded, like background noise in a storm. The storm was him. His resurrection was not a return, it was a reset. He discarded what remained of A'Sharad. Even the last fragments of memory that once tethered him to Jedi halls or desert suns were swept away. Krayt had no past now, only direction. The Sith who had betrayed him, Wlock, the one who whispered loyalty and acted in fear, was gone. Erased. A footnote in a tomb that would never be marked. And yet, Krayt did not feel rage, not anymore. Because what emerged from the sarcophagus was beyond anger, beyond revenge. He had let go of needing to prove his vision. He would now enforce it. His strength was not raw, it was honed. The body that had once rotted beneath the coral had become sleek, efficient, more machine than flesh. But he was not Darth Vader. He was not a tool. He was the will. One Sith, one empire, one war. He walked again among the living, but none truly knew it. Not yet. The galaxy spun on, thinking him dead, thinking the throne now open for struggle. Let them fight. Let them betray. Let them splinter. For Krayt did not return to reclaim power. He returned to end everything that stood in its way. Not as a reborn tyrant, but as a final judgment. Cade Skywalker did not want destiny. He wanted distance. From the Jedi who failed. From the Sith who hunted. From the name that carried centuries of weight. But the Force never asked what he wanted. It remembered him. He was the last Skywalker heir to power that once balanced the galaxy and cursed it. Born into the ruins of two orders, he lived among smugglers and thieves, hiding his bloodline behind scars and silence. He healed for credits, he killed for peace. But peace never lasted, because Darth Krayt was searching. To Krayt, Cade was not a man, he was a key. The living vessel of a lineage that refused extinction. The Skywalker line had shaped every rise and fall since the dawn of the Republic. They ended empires. They redeemed monsters. They broke the galaxy and rebuilt it again. Krayt believed that legacy could not continue, not while he ruled. The prophecy that had once crowned Anakin as the Chosen One had decayed into myth. Yet, Krayt still felt its echo. It haunted him like a shadow he could not kill. Every time he looked at Cade, he saw that echo moving toward him, inevitable, quiet, patient. The boy had his father's defiance, his ancestors' fire, but none of their faith. The Jedi had tried to reclaim him. The Sith had tried to seduce him. Both failed. Cade lived by one truth. The Force was a curse that took everything he loved. He had sworn never to use it again. But the galaxy no longer offered neutrality. The fell Empire's remnants hid in exile. The Jedi, shattered, clung to forgotten worlds. And the One Sith rebuilt under Krayt's silent command spread like disease through the cracks of war. Cade tried to ignore the pull. He smuggled spice, fought bounty hunters, saved strangers he didn't mean to. But the Force always found him, through nightmares, through whispers, through visions of a face he didn't recognize, a man of armor and red eyes, waiting. That face belonged to Krayt. When they finally met, it wasn't in battle, it was in recognition. Two survivors standing at opposite ends of a prophecy neither believed in. Krayt saw potential where Cade saw ruin. "You carry power beyond any Jedi," Krayt said softly. "Power that can heal the galaxy or end it." Cade answered with silence. He didn't want the galaxy healed. He wanted it to forget him. But Krayt could not allow forgetting. He offered the boy what he could not refuse: clarity, the power to end pain, the ability to bring back what was lost, the temptation every Skywalker faced. And Cade, like all before him, listened, not because he trusted the Sith, but because he was tired of running from what he already was. The Force had brought them together, not as enemies, but as mirrors, one consumed by power, the other by fear of it. And somewhere between them, the galaxy began to hold its breath. It began on Had Abaddon, a world buried in forgotten wars and dark rivers of the Force. Once a candidate for the Imperial throne, now a graveyard for old empires. Krayt chose it for a reason. It was quiet, cold, empty, a place where destiny could roar without witnesses. The final confrontation was never meant to be a war of fleets. It was a reckoning between two wills. The One Sith moved like shadows, cloaked in crimson and silence. Cade Skywalker arrived with little more than instinct and the ghosts of everyone he had failed to save. He wasn't a Jedi, not anymore. But he had learned something no temple could teach: survival. They met beneath the storm-lit sky, where the wind howled like prophecy, and the ground cracked from the pressure of unspoken futures. Krayt stood without fear. His eyes no longer held pain, only stillness, like death that had learned to walk. "I do not want to destroy you," Krayt said, but it was a lie. He wanted to erase the very idea of Cade, the rebellion he carried in his blood, the refusal to kneel, the mercy that still flickered somewhere behind his anger. Cade attacked first, not with honor, not with control, but with fury. They fought across broken temples and scorched stone, blades flashing like memory. Krayt's strikes were precise, elegant, filled with purpose. Kade's were wild, desperate, alive. He fought like someone who didn't expect to win but refused to lose. Every clash echoed with the sound of choices neither could undo. Krayt was stronger, but Kade was free. The Force cracked around them, torn between light and shadow. Krayt tried to dominate it, to bend it into order. Kade let it move through him, chaotic and raw. He didn't command the Force. He answered it, and the Force answered back. Lightning arcs through Krayt's armor. Blood hit the sand. The sky split in two. But in the end, Kade had Krayt on his knees. Not out of superiority, but because Krayt had underestimated what Kade had become. "Do it," Krayt said, voice steady. "Finish it." Kade raised his blade. Time slowed. He had killed Sith before. He could do it again, end the war, end the fear, end the man who had haunted his bloodline like a curse. But he didn't. He turned the blade off and walked away. Because mercy, Kade realized, was the one thing Krayt could never understand. And perhaps that was why Krayt could never truly win. The war didn't end in that moment, but something did. Krayt had returned from death to conquer legacy, and legacy had just let him live. Darth Krayt did not scream when Kade spared him. He did not curse, he did not chase. He simply watched the boy walk away, and felt something he had not known in decades. Fracture. Because in mercy, Kade had done what thousands of warriors, Jedi, and assassins could not. He had left Krayt alive not out of fear or respect, but out of something deeper. Something Krayt had buried long ago beneath armor and pain. Compassion, and it cut deeper than any blade. Krayt had once believed power was the only truth, that unity through dominance was the only way to bring peace. His One Sith was a machine built from trauma, bound by vision. It moved because he willed it. It survived because he commanded it. But in that final moment, when mercy became his sentence, he felt something loosen. Not in his body, but in the Force. A thread pulled free. Kade Skywalker had not redeemed him. That was never the goal. He had shown him something worse. A future that did not need him. For years, Krayt believed he was the only answer. That the galaxy was too broken to heal on its own. That order must be imposed. Pain must be given purpose. Death must be used as fire to cauterize chaos. But now, that purpose cracked. He returned to Coruscant in silence. No parades, no proclamations. Just the quiet whispers of Sith, who sensed their master had changed. He gave no explanation. Because how could he explain that for the first time, he questioned whether the One Sith was his to control, or whether it had begun to outgrow him. Darth Wlock had tried to kill him once for this very reason. Perhaps now, Krayt finally understood why. Mercy had not spared his life. It had wounded his identity. He meditated for days, not in rage, but in stillness, letting the Force move without chains. It flowed differently now, not through domination but through acceptance, and in that flow, he glimpsed something, a galaxy not ruled, not broken, but balanced. It didn't erase what he had done. It didn't make him noble, but it made him quiet. He summoned no armies. He launched no new war. Instead, he disappeared again, this time not to conquer, but to listen to the Force, to the wound, to the boy who walked away. Some Sith live forever because they refused to die, but Krayt lived now because someone let him. And in that mercy, the cycle began to shift, not end, not restart, shift. Because the Force does not forget, it waits. And somewhere across the stars, the last Skywalker continued forward, never knowing the silence he left behind would echo through darkness for years to come. He returned from death with silence behind his eyes. No vengeance, no triumph, only purpose. For years, Darth Krayt had lived in shadows, wrapped in pain and prophecy. But now, as the galaxy spun without him, as war shifted toward younger hands and fading names, he saw only one final path forward. The galaxy was slipping again into chaos, into weakness. And he believed he was the only one who could stop it, not because he wanted power anymore, but because he had given everything for peace and received only war in return. Krayt emerged from hidden corners of the galaxy, where Sith alchemy and unnatural will had rebuilt his broken form. He was no longer a man, not the warrior of the desert, not the Jedi's son, not the twisted host of the Yuuzhan Vong's living torment. He was something beyond what Sith or Jedi had ever seen, a weapon with memory. Those who once followed him, those who betrayed him, those who built their own power from his bones, they did not understand what was coming. Because Krayt no longer needed an army, he had become the storm itself. On worlds touched by the old empire, whispers began to return, of red blades in the dark, of Sith who answered to no council, no code, only to the will of one voice long thought dead. The One Sith, shattered by betrayal, began to stir, not from loyalty, not from belief, but from fear, because Darth Krayt's return was not a message, it was a warning. He hunted those who abandoned him, not for revenge, but because disobedience was disorder, and disorder had no place in his new vision. His presence warped the Force itself, not in rage, but in stillness. It was as if the Force stopped moving around him, like even it held its breath. He began to speak again, not in declarations, but in truths only he believed. That the galaxy was not meant to choose, that freedom was a lie people clung to out of fear, that only unity could bring peace, and unity could not survive mercy. But even as his body stood stronger than before, something inside him felt quiet, not broken, not uncertain, just distant. It was the first time he could not feel the future, and it was the first time he didn't care. This final return wasn't about survival. It wasn't about legacy. It was about completing what he began, even if it killed him again. Because Darth Krayt no longer feared death, he feared leaving the galaxy unfinished. And in that fear, he found clarity. The final war had already begun. Even if no one could see it yet, the One Sith was never built on trust. It was built on silence, on fear, on the illusion that one will could hold 1,000 knives in one direction without cutting itself. But without Krayt's constant presence, without his voice threading through every ambition, the unity began to rot. Darth Wlock had believed himself loyal, and in his own way, he was. He believed in the vision, not the man. And when the man grew weak, when Krayt's body decayed under coral and agony, Wlock acted. He took control not with hate, but with logic. Krayt's death, quiet and cold, was not a coup. It was a conclusion, a final footnote written by one who thought the story had already ended. But the galaxy did not stop, and the vision did not hold. The One Sith began to splinter from the inside, not with open rebellion, but with doubt. Whispers moved through temples. Acolytes questioned orders behind closed doors. Lords made plans that served themselves before the Order, and Wlock alone at the top could feel it. He tried to speak in Krayt's name. He enforced the doctrine. He punished deviation. But it was already too late, because Darth Krayt's power had never truly come from fear. It had come from presence, from being in the room, from making others feel like the Force bent around him. And now, even dead, his absence was louder than Wlock's commands. Some believed he would return. Others hoped he wouldn't. But all felt something missing. The mission had become machinery, efficient, sharp, but soulless, and without belief, even power feels brittle. The Sith who once knelt out of purpose now obeyed out of habit, and habit, in time, decays into carelessness. Alliances began to shift, lords began to vanish. Whispers of lost holocrons, hidden apprentices, and secret escapes began to multiply. The One Sith, once hidden in darkness, began to be seen by Jedi survivors, by bounty hunters, by powers still clinging to the dream of a free galaxy. Wlock tightened his grip, but the more he pulled, the more the Order cracked. And then he felt it, a ripple in the Force. Not an echo, not a memory, but a presence, cold, focused, alive. Krayt had returned not through mysticism, not through legend, but in flesh. The betrayal had failed. The vision had not ended. And now, the cost of disobedience would be paid in full. Darth Krayt did not rage. He did not scream. He simply looked at what remained of his empire and understood what must be done. To finish what he began, he would have to tear it down first. Krayt returned to the heart of his empire not as a conqueror, but as a shadow. No ceremony, no declaration, only the quiet sound of footsteps through the crimson halls of his own betrayal. The Sith, who saw him that day, did not speak. They couldn't, because the thing walking before them was not the same master they had buried. He was leaner, harder, almost translucent in the glow of the temple fires, like a ghost wearing armor. Wlock waited for him at the throne, the same throne from which he had once spoken Krayt's words with false conviction. Now, those words returned to him like judgment. "You thought I was gone," Krayt said. "But the Force does not release those who still have work to do." The chamber trembled, not from rage but from inevitability. Wlock drew his blade. First, Krayt did not. He didn't need to, because this was not a duel. It was correction. They clashed, red against red, the air hissing with every strike. Wlock fought with logic, each movement deliberate, shaped by belief in order. Krayt fought with silence, every motion a reminder of pain survived. No wasted effort, no mercy. The walls bore witness to their history, teacher and student, visionary and skeptic. Two Sith who had built a religion out of control and now drowned in its consequence. When it ended, Wlock was on his knees. His lightsaber cracked, his armor bleeding smoke. "You made them forget who they serve," Krayt said. "I saved them from your weakness," Wlock rasped. Krayt's answer was a whisper. "Then you never understood strength." The strike that followed was final. No cruelty, no hatred, just precision, the act of removing a fracture from bone. Wlock fell, eyes wide, the truth finally seen too late. Krayt stood over him as the blood cooled on marble floors. He had taken back his empire, but it no longer felt like victory. Around him, the Sith knelt once more. They didn't cheer, they didn't dare. They only waited for instruction, for absolution, for the next command that would fill the void. And Krayt realized the silence that followed was not obedience, it was emptiness. The One Sith had no heart left to command, only fear. He looked upon the army he had rebuilt from nothing and saw ghosts, thousands of them, each bound by a lie he had told himself first. He had won every war except the one that mattered. The war against decay. The war against time. The war against himself. And in that moment, surrounded by everything he had created, Darth Krayt understood. Victory had become indistinguishable from loss. Darth Krayt felt it long before it came. Not pain, not fear, just the slow unraveling of a thread he could no longer hold. His body had survived everything: betrayal, exile, rebirth, but the will that held it together was fading. Even the armor, once fused to his flesh, began to loosen. The coral no longer obeyed. The living metal that had sustained him for decades now turned against its master, retreating like a tide. He stood in his meditation chamber on Coruscant, surrounded by the relics of victory: empty thrones, extinguished sabers, statues of power that no longer meant anything. The galaxy outside still feared his name, but the force inside him was silent. For years, he had fought to conquer death, to cage it, to break its rhythm. He called it weakness. He told himself it was rebellion. But deep down, he knew the truth. He wasn't afraid to die. He was afraid to be forgotten. Every Sith before him had vanished into the dark, some devoured by madness, others by their own apprentices. He wanted to be different. He wanted his order to outlast him, to prove that control could become peace, that domination could be destiny. But now, as his breath slowed, he finally understood why the Jedi let go when their time came. Because nothing eternal can grow, and he had tried to make eternity bleed. He felt the Force shift one last time. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't kind, it was simply honest. Images flashed through his mind. The sands of Tatooine, the face of his father, the Jedi robes he once wore, the screams of the men he led through endless wars, and the eyes of Cade Skywalker, the boy who spared him, not out of pity, but because he refused to become him. Krayt smiled, barely. For the first time in his life, he saw what he could never create: balance. He collapsed where he stood. No lightning, no screams, no prophecy fulfilled. Just the sound of armor cracking and the whisper of air escaping his lungs. Outside, the One Sith scattered. Some fled into the outer rim. Some fought to claim what was left, but most simply stopped. Because without Krayt's will, there was nothing left to follow. And as the city turned beneath him, the Force finally released its grip. Not with judgment, but with relief. Darth Krayt, the man who conquered death, died alone, but not defeated. Because his story would not vanish. It would linger, like ash, drifting through the galaxy, reminding every soul who sought to control it that peace cannot be owned, only found.